see that I'm being called to wrap it up, so I'll wrap it up where I started. Conservatives unconditionally support Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine. That was clear from 1991 when we recognized their independence. It was clear when President Zelensky was here asking for our help, and my colleague Candice Bergen stood in this place and unequivocally said we support Ukraine. The current leader has said we unequivocally support Ukraine. That is the record. That is the correction of the misinformation and disinformation from the members opposite. And Madam Speaker, we need to help Ukraine. Thank you.
Questions in?
Have a bunch. Oh, all right. Okay, there's a bunch of things going on today. There's definitely the committees, right? We have the committees. Things, they seem to be toning down a bit. The Liberals have had a shocking rise in the polls. Shocking is in because I don't know why they have a rise. Maybe because of late they haven't had, well, no, there has been new scandals. The Ethics Commissioner has declared that Mr. Green, the person who gave the Prime Minister Trudeau the Jamaica trip worth $94,000-ish, is a true friend. So he's been declared as a true friend, unlike the previous, other vacation. And funny how when you quit smoking, it's harder to breathe for a while. Cleaning out is never fun. But it's not cigarettes. I quit those years ago. But it's the ethics commissioner said, hey, okay, he's a true friend. He can give you $100,000. He's just very, very wealthy friend. Good, that doesn't mean that it. I think the people who have already decided on Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister, they won't change their minds on this opinion. It was just good meat, for the bases. The big news. We're just waiting here. Parliament hasn't started. They do the national anthem. And for some reason, I think possibly because it could be embarrassing for the parliamentarians, they don't show the singing of the national anthem. And there's Candice Bergen. I caught one video of I got one video of her singing. She was an excellent singer. Like could have been a singer. I was very surprised. And I got a flag on that video. It was totally obtuse. It had no real basis of reality. I fought it, but I deleted it anyway. As it was like 2 months it was going on. Basically, I think what it was one of those flags that wasn't a real flag, but, didn't want it out there. So that's just one thing. They don't like to see the national anthem. And the funny thing is the national anthem, it was being flagged by a Colombian. I had to actually translate what the heck it said by this Colombian company that was playing of the Canadian national anthem. So that's something to note. I think it's all across actually YouTube that there's companies out there flagging people who are putting on national anthems, at least the Canadian one. But like I said, it could have something to do with, the politicians, they don't want to look silly. And if you're not a singer, you don't really want to have your voice like Roseanne, right? Remember what happened to Roseanne when she sang the national anthem bad? People were ballistic. They had tape recordings of her and steamrolled over her voice singing. So, it's understandable why a politician would be hesitant to have them singing on it. Though, like I said, Candice Bergen, who's no longer an MP, that's the only reason I'm saying it now, she was an excellent singer. And I imagine there's a few in there, but that's how that stands. So what else do we have going on? What's the alpha and what's the omega? The beginning is we're having about the elections. So that's the beginning of Parliament today. It's all about election renewal. It's by I forgot her name. MP Lisa NDP from Ladysmith, which is probably one of the most beautiful places in the country, according to me. Lady Smith is on the island of Vancouver. You know, I don't want to call them cliffs, but it felt like cliffs along, along the ocean. Just beautiful. Well, she has as you can read in the description, actually, that's her full motion. Her full motion, is basically that 80% of Canadians, I'm going from memory here, 80% of Canadians want to see election reform. So they want to see that the Liberals and Conservatives, I think, are most hesitant on it. Also, not many people are getting involved in elections. I think that's changing now. People have realized after the pandemic, hey, politics actually kind of matter when they shut my business down and tell me I can't let my kid go play on the playground. That believes changing, but we do have a declining rates of people, going to the elections. So, all you have to do is go to your small base. And that definitely is going, they've been talking about it, though, because our system is a little bit of American, a little bit of the Westminster system. And people say it's not as reflective of the country, as the rural has a lot of power in this, because it's broken up into basically AORs, areas of responsibility for a member of parliament, right? And so since they break it all up, and they break it all up into all kinds of areas, that's basically that person's area, and a large majority of Canada is rural, right? So a lot of people say it's not, it's a system. It seems to work. It's a little bit of, someone had called it divide and conquer, because no one will basically have supreme power, the cities or the country. It keeps it a balance, and it kind of does. As you can see, the Conservatives for a long time have dominated the country. And the NDP got some northern good rural areas. The NDP are also there, but very much to a lesser degree. It's the Conservatives in the rural, right? Live free, stay off my 100 acres, I'll shoot you, and then the Liberals own the cities, with also a mingling, we'll call it a smattering of the NDP. Like the NDP have certain cities. Hamilton is like Orangetown, right? We got some comments here. Toad, I'm sorry, I don't know. Looks like a toad with a perm. Oh, that's not nice. She's actually a very good MP. I don't know if she likes me. I don't care. But she ran, and when she was running for leadership, she was doing like cute slogans, which I found nice, because politics are getting like harsh. I think you have to personally, I believe, leaning into some cute, funnier sayings, because hey, we know that there's someone spitting vile vitriol right at her 10 feet away, to counter that. And she did that. I had an interview or two with her. Maybe it was a bit of a grilling on me, but it was an interview, and she's a miner's daughter, a kind of like, not, well, maybe it's possible that she actually really is, but you know what I mean? She's that type of, what do you call it, archetype, engineering degree, she's got black belt, she drives like a Mustang, you know what I mean? She's that kind of person, and she's fairly tall, so she has a presence in her room. Haven't heard much from her after that. So 2 more minutes, and we'll be done. The National Anthem. Don says, just like stunning and brave. I don't get that. But I'm slow today. Wasn't allowed to walk my dog. Oh, yeah. In a 200-hectare park. That sure made sense. Well, it was a bit about... well, I won't go into that. But I think it had to do with the control more than anything. Everyone was panicking, and I think everyone panicked when they said, just stay home. It's easier for us. Because when you're walking around, someone calls and we freak out, and I think it was a part of that. Just try to do blanket statements and blanket baloney. because it was too much work to decipher the proper things. But who knows? Where does she stand on men and women's? I don't know. I don't really. Couldn't care less. Personally, I just couldn't care less. That's up to each individual sport, and that will wash itself very shortly. So we have one more minute to go. So what else? We're at the alpha is the elections. Then we have more to it with ArriveCan. There's the center will hold with some ArriveCan. I'll probably have that put up that first, and that's continuing saga. What I've seen of it, I'm trying not to hold too tight on it because I don't think anything's going to happen. I think it was a pandemic spending thing where people just pressed fire, just do it, and contractors may have not understood the full contract, the scope of work or whatever that they needed to do, and they priced accordingly. And the government now, it looks like they may have overpaid for the chaos of the pandemic, which that to me, wouldn't even want to point the finger at anyone involved in it, even the person that looks the most red-handed, because it was under the pandemic times. Remember, they were working from home. People were thinking civilization is over, and these people work in the civilization business, So I imagine a worker was not doing their due diligence as much. So but hey, this investigation is great. Okay, good. Care about men and women's sports. That's good. That's just not my purview. That's government. That's good for you, Kimmy. Kimmy Monchalon. It's individual sports boards that have to do with that. And what it really is culture wars. It's just trying to get people to be riled. And it works. It works. It's the easiest thing to do, Having a boy in a woman's change room pisses people off, right? Of course it does. Like Porky's figured that out. It's just it's one of these things. It's a wave. It'll wash all on its own. It'll go away. No one will be required to put much energy into it, though we will, because it's something that that's why I don't discuss it. We know where it's leading to. It's a third. We need almost a third area, and then some people fit in. It's pretty basic, pretty simple. What else do we got? Then the third is industry. So Industry Canada, they are looking at data harvesters, people that are harvesting data through websites and basically through businesses, right? So what they can do, what they can't do, on picking, on all of that stuff. Yeah. So I'll put up a little image. Let's see with this image. Nope. Drink some water. Calm down. Drink some water. Oh, yeah, you fishing? Crypto's fishing. Okay. Oh, no. There we go. Oh, let's do another one. Panic. Ah! It's almost here. Okay, so I'm going to put up the first thing is going to be ArriveCan. They're just, I believe, starting now. I have to do this. Oh, who wants to see that guy? Image one. There we go. This is actually a Native American sun god symbol. Well, not necessarily Native American as much as I won't even mention it more. It's actually, yeah, it's cool. Something I've been interested in of late. It's okay. Yeah, it was not a very busy day in Parliament on Friday. The committees were basically shut down, really. Oh. But yeah, again, I'm going to mention this. The polls, I'm going to pull it up and discuss these polls. Conservatives dropping in the polls, liberals increasing. So this is why everyone gets cocky when they're winning in politics, and I get it, right? When you're winning in the polls, but the polls, though they're so interesting and juicy, I love them so. They are not elections. And the Alberta election it's about a decade ago, was the first time that I seen that polls were so far off. It was like, holy crap. And another thing is that polls shift, and they can shift very, very fast. Now, I'm not saying don't listen to polls, because they're interesting and they're fun, and it keeps us interested in the game. So polls show when things work and when things are not working. But my big thing is polls is that I'm just saying, devil's advocating it. One big amazing program that the whole country gets behind, now that's very difficult to do, can change a government that's like literally on its way out in the polling, according to polls, right? Elections can be always different. Can shift it from no way they're even going to get 20 seats to majority. And it's happened. It's happened before, and of course it'll happen again. And I think we're more likely going to see these large swings in the political landscape today, because we're in a pretty tumultuous time. And a lot of, and if you look at the Conservatives and the Liberals, they look very similar parties in many, many ways. So, okay, so the Liberals are at 26% now, from a drop, or from a rise, I should say. They were at 24%. So 23. So they have a 3% increase, where the Conservatives have like a 4% decrease. Now, this is from an aggregate of polling, and this is polling. No, I take it with salt. But there's been a shift of about 7%. Like it's, but the Conservatives are at 14 percentage points above the Liberals. Really looks good for Conservatives, having a 99% chance that they are going to have a hold of government. But like I said, there's still time. There's possibilities, so it's just something to keep in mind, I think. Okay, so we have. Sorry, here I got Kelly Block, the Conservative up. She's a MP. There we go.
Push that back from
enjoy.
Our full time with Mr. Yiglik. Mr. Lafleur, we'll start with you, please, for your opening statement. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Bonjour. Mr. Chair, I first want to
do you want to hear the opening statement? Yeah, it's a new statement.
Unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
As Executive Director of the Professional Integrity Division at the Canada Border Services Agency, my responsibilities include providing an independent investigation function for the agency. My team conducts investigations into allegations of
I'm going to turn the volume up for those who have headphones. Be wary.
With reports of our findings to allow them to address instances of misconduct in the workplace.
The
process of investigating allegations takes time, and it requires a systematic approach to ensure that all evidence is properly gathered and considered prior to final conclusions being made.
Policies and procedures relating to internal investigations are issued under the authority of the Chief Security Officer of the CBSA and are aligned with the Policy on Government Security, which requires that we ensure that any significant issues regarding policy compliance, suspected criminal activity, national security concerns, or other security issues are assessed, investigated, documented, acted on, and reported to the Deputy Head and other investigative bodies as appropriate. I have been a security practitioner in the Federal Public Service for 15 years, working in the fields of intelligence, security screening, misconduct investigations, and security operations. During this time, I have conducted, directed, and overseen hundreds of administrative investigations, both relating to employee misconduct and as part of reviews for cause of employee security screening. Key to my current role is ensuring the integrity of investigations, procedural fairness, and due process for those under investigation. It is for these reasons that it would be inappropriate for me to speak to you about certain details or matters which remain under investigation. Comme le sait le comité,
as the committee is aware, the current CBSA investigation into allegations first brought forward by Bottler AA is still ongoing. I am therefore limited in what I will be able to share about that process. What I can speak about is our investigation process and investigations in general terms. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Thanks very much. Ms. Block, we'll start with you, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lafleur, for joining us today to provide testimony on what has become a very lengthy and complex study into not only the ArriveCan app, but now some investigations that are taking place within the Department of the CBSA. I want to confirm that the preliminary findings, have these been made public?
they have not.
They have not been made public. So after President O'Gorman referred the Bottler allegation for investigation, were you the individual tasked with leading this investigation from the beginning?
I am the director responsible for conducting investigations within the CBSA. So me and my team, yes, were assigned this file.
Right from the beginning? From the beginning
in November of 2022.
Thank you very much. In your opening statement, as you just made, you outlined that the investigative process, and I quote, the process of investigating allegations takes time and requires a systematic approach to ensure that all evidence is properly gathered and considered prior to final conclusions being made. If that is true, if that is important, can you provide any rationale to the committee as to why President O'Gorman would imply to this committee that Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano were guilty of misconduct? And this happened on January 18th of 2023.
So I'm not exactly sure which statements with the President you're referring to, but I can speak to my process and that we have not yet reached any conclusions relating to misconduct.
So do you think it was prudent to share initial findings with the superiors of those involved in the investigation?
What I can say is that it is normal in the course of an investigation for our investigators to share information with management so that they may take administrative measures that they feel are required pending the conclusion of the investigation.
Did you recommend that the report be shared with the Deputy Heads of Health Canada and the CRA?
I did.
You did. So when did you become aware of the suspensions of Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano?
I became aware when the matter became public through the Globe and Mail, I believe it was.
Again, I'll ask, do you think it is appropriate to suspend employees without pay when you have only completed an initial statement of fact?
I can't speak to the appropriateness of the decisions taken by other departments. Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald are not employees of the CBSA. I can't make any assessments relating to their employment. What I can say, and I think it's important for the committee to understand, is that it is normal in the course of an investigation to ensure that mitigating measures are put in place when there are potential risks. So that is something that is in our processes, and it is why we share information to management during the course of the investigation.
So how do you square that with the systematic approach of ensuring that all evidence is properly gathered and considered prior to final conclusions if, in fact, employees have been suspended without pay before a thorough investigation has been conducted?
So management may take any number of administrative measures pending the conclusion of investigation. I can speak generally. For example, if we're conducting an investigation indicating an employee may be disclosing information inappropriately, management may choose to remove their accesses to sensitive systems. So this is normal in the course of an investigation.
So were McDonald and Utano allowed to respond before their suspension?
That decision was taken by their respective departments. I can't speak to that.
Okay, thank you. We have heard contradictory testimony from President O'Gorman as to when the investigation began. Can you provide some clarity for us? Did it start in November of 2022 or January of 2023?
We started the investigation as soon as we received the allegations from Bottler AI in November of 2022.
In November of 2022. Okay, so it took you nearly a year to provide an initial statement of fact to the president of the CBSA, which happened shortly after McDonald and Utano gave testimony critical of President O'Gorman before this committee. And so I would just say that it seems odd that there was a sudden breakthrough in the case against these individuals right after they were critical of some of the actions taken and the testimony before committee. I also want to note that you mentioned in your opening statement that you provide management with reports of your findings. Does this include providing initial statements of fact?
We provide information to management as it comes up during the investigation. Usually it is not in a formal format. This was a different case as they were not employees of the CBSA.
Okay, so was President O'Gorman a part of the management team that you provided reports to?
She did receive a copy of the preliminary statements of facts, yes.
So then she had direct access to the investigation of former employees who publicly criticized her. I'm wondering, again, if you can provide us with your opinion on whether or not this does not seem like it compromises the integrity of the investigation. Does it at least not concern you that someone with, in her position...
You'll have to wrap up, Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you. That has, I think, implied guilt before a final investigation holds a position in regards to the power to investigate?
So, Mr. Chair, I can assure this committee that none of the actions taken in the course of the investigation were as a result of any evidence heard before this committee. Our investigation is proceeding in parallel with the work of the committee, but not as a result of anything that you've heard.
Thank you, Mr. Lafleur. Mr. Shawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Lafleur. Mr. Lafleur, you've been called as a witness under the study of ArriveCan application. So for Canadians who are watching today, I'm going to ask some pointed questions, and then hopefully we could get into more in-depth conversation around the investigation that's going on. Are you conducting any investigation internal as it relates to the development of the application ArriveCan?
ArriveCan as an application is not something that...
Sorry, I had to pause for a second. I don't know this MP, though I believe I seen him a while ago, and he asked, and he just said there, I'm going to ask pointed questions. And this is what I'd like to kind of highlight today, is that I believe that the Liberals, they're starting to change a tact and act more like the Conservatives in a lot of these manners, in hunting, hunting's the wrong word, in, tracking down the issues that they've created sometimes that are in the bureaucratic systems and finding the problem or the solution. It seems that they're going harder on it, and I think this MP in particular is maybe one of them that's leading this new kind of angle, and that may be why they're changing in their polls. I'm not sure. What you think? Please leave your comment on the side about what do you think about this new change in liberal tact that I've noticed, and if you noticed it also, or I'm just imagining.
We're investigating.
Okay.
We're investigating procurement matters around.
Okay. Are you investigating anything around procurement of any direct or indirect activities, whether it's procurement, whether it's a complaint, whether it's people's, as it relates to the application of ArriveCan?
Some of the allegations that we are investigating do touch on contracts that were used for ArriveCan. Okay, thank you. So in your testimony, you talked about that you cannot, and I quote, therefore limited in what I can be able to share about the process. What I can speak about is our investigation process and investigation in general terms. So can you tell us about your investigation process? I come from a management consulting background. We usually look at it. We look at the process. We look at the timeline. We look at the outcome. We have. Can you share with us the steps in this process, some of the outcome that anticipated, and the timing of these outcomes, and who you share these documents with, or you are allowed to share these findings at the preliminary stages with? So generally speaking, when we receive allegations of employee misconduct, we initiate a preliminary review. The point of that preliminary review is to see if there is any evidence to substantiate whether something occurred or not. If we have evidence to substantiate, we would move forward to a formal phase of the investigation. If there's no evidence to support the allegations, we would close the file. If there's exculpatory evidence at that point, we would, of course, not move forward with an investigation. We try to do that preliminary phase within 45 business days. Of course, depending on the case, that may go longer, may be shorter. Once we have made a decision to move to a formal phase of the investigation, we determine the allegations that the employees would have to respond to, and those are detailed in relation to the CBSA Code of Conduct. The respondents in the investigation are then notified of the investigation of these allegations. We then proceed to witness interviews, to interviewing the respondents, before finally, once all the evidence have been gathered, drafting an investigation report with our conclusions. That report then is shared with CBSA senior management, and they are responsible for addressing any founded allegations of misconduct.
Thank you. So are you in a position to be able to share with us whether you have completed the preliminary review?
With relation...
As it relates to the investigation that you're doing? Yes. Because it looks like it's a two-stage. And if there seems to be some evidence within the preliminary review and within the first 45 minutes, then you proceed to the second stage, which you call the formal phase. Okay, so there seems to be that first phase is completed. There was a determination that it necessitates moving into a formal phase. You have already moved into the formal phase. Can you share with us where in the process that you identified from a formal process of allegation, and then meeting and conducting interviews, and then meeting with witnesses and all of those? Are you in a position to be able to share with us where you are in that process?
So we did complete the preliminary review. We have notified the respondents of the allegations against them, and we are proceeding with witness interviews at this time.
Okay, so you're in the process of doing the witness interviews?
That's correct.
And so is it fair to assume that given the fact that you have moved into a formal phase, you found evidence that you needed to be able to further explore?
As I've stated before, that is part of the process. Before moving to a formal phase of the investigation, we have to have some level of assurance that the allegations may have occurred.
Okay. Can you give us a sense, you're very clear on the 45 days in the preliminary review. Is there any timeline established for the formal phase?
So depending on the complexity of the investigation, we aim to complete a formal investigation between 60 and 120 business days. Of course, when we're dealing with more complex files or files that involve potential criminality, those timelines can extend significantly.
Okay. So established timelines, 60 to 120. if there is any criminality, potential criminality, then there is no timelines for it.
That's right.
Okay. I only got about 10 seconds. Is there any date established by when you're going to publish your report?
No, we'll be done when we're done our work.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lafleur, for coming today. Recently, in the papers, we've read that some officials might have deleted some of their emails, and I'd like to know if that might have something to do with some hot topics these days. I'd like to know if you have seen in the past emails about a sensitive topic being deleted. Intentionally, I would say no. Now, in terms of email management, when we're talking about procurement, not just for, say, hot topics, but let's say there's a procurement process involved, is there any kind of email management process? I'm not an expert in contracts. However, as managers, we are responsible for ensuring that all decisions are documented. Thank you. So when this happens, when these are documented, is that consistent within all departments? So is the process consistent, or does each department have their own way of documenting decisions? I'm sorry that I can't give you that level of detail about this. Here at the committee, we heard from a whistleblower, and there was a process of investigation, and it appeared that people were protecting each other. So, with all due respect, when there are some very serious cases, such as the one that we are currently considering, would it be more efficient for the CBSA to investigate internally, or would it be better or more efficient for someone from the outside to investigate? Well, I would say that my role is to fulfill that role of an independent investigator, so I don't work for management as such. And this is how I explain it to my team. We are not working for them when we are conducting investigations. Now, if there were a fully independent function, yes, that could provide a certain level of assurance. But I would say that we're independent in our approach. When your investigation is finished, do your recommendations have to be, are they mandatory in terms of their implementation? Does something happen? Are those at fault, say, penalized or sanctioned? What happens after the completion of your report? Well, just a point of clarification. We only make recommendations in our report. So we outline the facts regarding the issues, and we reach our findings. We decide whether or not the allegations are substantiated, and that report is provided to management, and then it is up to them to decide whether any disciplinary steps will be taken. So there might be a verbal warning, there might be a suspension, there are a number of steps that can be taken. So you reach your conclusions, you decide whether or not there was fault, and then management decides what to do. But when members of management are involved, is it still management that has to decide what actions will be taken? And do you think that there may be a risk of just rapping them on the knuckles and asking them to please not do this again because their reputation is involved? Well, when there is an investigation into, say, senior management, then the report goes to a higher level, higher than the agency. And it is up to them to make decisions, and they are responsible for their decisions. So your role then is not to do a follow-up on what was actually done based on the report. So you'd simply table the report. I see. Now, Parliament Hill could also be called the Hill of Rumors. And let's say that parliamentarians have access to documents that aren't necessarily public. And let's say there's a rumor circulating about the content of those documents. Would any of those kinds of things, when there was an investigation, would any of that be included? Would you include those, what is being said? You mean in terms of how members are acting or what they're saying? No. My role is to investigate people within the agency. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lafleur, for being here with us and answering our questions to the best of your ability. And apologies to the committee if I'm a little slower than usual. The airplane I was on last night from Toronto suffered a cracked windshield in the air, and so it resulted in a very late night, early morning. Better safe than sorry, though. Certainly don't regret turning back when something like that happens. I thought I'd start my questions around potential criminality. And, I understand there's also an RCMP investigation that is ongoing. But in your work, Mr. Lafleur, if you came across instances of fraud or other criminality over the course of your investigation, could you go over what steps you would take if indeed you came across such examples?
Yeah. So the Policy on Government Securities Directive on Security Management, paragraph 4.1.7, requires us to report any suspicions of criminality to law enforcement of jurisdiction. So when that does occur, we would typically first reach out to the RCMP, have a preliminary discussion to confirm whether our understanding of what occurred may be criminality. We're of course, we're not law enforcement, but we do have a responsibility to report that when we see it.
I note, and we had the ombudsperson at our last meeting, and I note in the ombudsperson's response to, in the CBSA's response to the ombudsperson's recommendations, CBSA states, the CBSA is strengthening processes and controls related to procurement planning, contract administration, corporate culture, and proactive monitoring to reduce the risk of fraud. It seems from that sentence like they feel that there is some risk of fraud that has become evident through the course of these investigations and conversations. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of instances would constitute fraud in the context of the allegations that are being made in this investigation?
So I can't speak to any specifics of the allegation, but what I can say is that anytime there is an exchange of money between the government and other parties, there is a potential risk of fraud. So people may want to circumvent internal controls to try to get something out of the system. Procurement is one area, finance is another where that may occur.
So in the context of procurement, could you provide like a very generic example of something that would clearly constitute fraud?
I can. So there have been numerous, sadly, cases in the past around false invoicing, either completely false businesses invoicing to the government and maybe an employee circumventing internal controls to sign both sides of a transaction. That would be clear fraud. From a vendor's perspective, submitting fraudulent documents would be could be considered fraud. There's any number of scenarios.
And is looking for instances of fraud or other criminality within the specific scope of your investigation?
It's within scope of my duties. I have another function within my team that aims to identify potential fraud, corruption, misuse using the agency's data through proactive data analytics. As we get into a file like this and we see evidence of potential fraud, we would report that to law enforcement.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald came to committee at a previous meeting. I wasn't at that meeting, but I'm familiar with what happened, and they brought a number of documents. You're familiar with these, I assume. Were those authorized and provided by the CBSA?
I'm not familiar with the documents that they would have provided to committee.
Okay. Moving on to the issue of security clearance, one of the issues at play here is the fact that GC Strategies, which had participated in the procurement process, did not have the document safeguarding capability that was stated as a requirement of the procurement. Could you describe document safeguarding requirements for sensitive procurements like the ArriveCan contracts?
I can speak generally. Again, that's not my area of expertise, but I have some exposure to it as a security practitioner. So when we're talking about document safeguarding, it means that the vendor may be required to hold protected information within their physical premises or within their IT systems, which would be different than if they were working solely within CBSA space, where they may have access to systems of ours. But when they control it, they need to have measures in place to protect it.
And what's the risk of misclassifying document safeguarding capability requirements in a procurement process?
In what regard? Sorry.
Well, if a company that is participating in a procurement does not have the stated document safeguarding capabilities and is given the work anyway, what is the risk at play?
Obviously, there's a risk of potential disclosure of that information if it's not kept protected. Traditionally, we're talking about like certified filing cabinets, things like that. More modern times means encryption on their systems if they're going to be holding protected information. So obviously that's
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Mr. Brock, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lafleur, with all due respect, your investigation in this matter is seriously flawed. You talk about your 15 years of experience working on hundreds of administrative investigations. You highlighted today in your opening statement that your key role is to ensure the integrity of the investigation, procedural fairness, and due process for those under investigation. And those under investigation have been targeted by you as Mr. Cameron McDonald and Mr. Antonio Utano. They're the only 2 individuals under investigation, and what you have done so far, sir, is done anything but to ensure procedural fairness. So much so that they've retained a lawyer, and a lawyer has brought an action in the Superior Court of Justice, and you, sir, are named as a defendant, as well as the Attorney General of Canada and the CBSA and Aaron O'Gorman, seeking declaratory relief that their rights to participate in this process has been compromised by you. You're aware of that?
I'm aware.
Right. And, sir, you don't have a legal degree, do you?
I do not.
No, and you don't understand the difference between a criminal standard of proof or a civil standard of proof, do you?
I do have some understanding of the difference.
Proof beyond a reasonable doubt on the criminal spectrum, beyond the bounds of probability on the civil spectrum. And you understand the difference between fact and allegation, don't you?
Of course.
Yet I've got access, sir, to your Project Helios preliminary statement of fact for both Cameron McDonald and Antonio Utano, and you interchange the concept of fact, which is a proven entity, and allegation. In fact, the title of the document, Project Helios, Preliminary Statement of Facts. That's misleading, and it's wrong, isn't it, sir? Because these are allegations.
So the report itself is a point-in-time document, right?
Sir, these are allegations. Allegations brought by Bottler AI. Yes or no?
There are allegations.
They're not a proven fact, are they?
They're not.
So I would suggest to you, you be much careful in the future as it relates to this investigation and other investigations, that you understand, sir, that the clear difference between an allegation and a fact, because you interchange this throughout your report. And the statement of fact and this preliminary statement of fact was ultimately sent on to the new two departments that Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utonio are employed by, right?
They were?
Yeah, and you expressed serious concerns, notwithstanding that nobody has been interviewed, that Mr. McDonald hasn't been interviewed, that Mr. Utonio hasn't been interviewed, that Mindone hasn't been interviewed, that Aaron O'Gorman, the president of the CBSA, hasn't been interviewed. Former President John Osowski has not been interviewed. You've identified a number of key individuals you want to be interviewed, and none of them have provided you with an interview, have they?
I'm not going to speak as to...
Well, I have the information right before me, sir. It's very clear that none of them have agreed to interview with you yet.
If I could add a point of clarification there. So the report was a point in time.
I don't care about point in time.
On December 19th.
This is affecting the lives and the livelihood of Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utonio.
So just one moment, Mr. Brock.
Can I ask my colleague, Mr. Brock, allow the witness the same amount of time to respond?
No,
because I'd like to hear,
right.
The line of question is very interesting. I'd just like to hear the response.
I appreciate both of you. Stop. I've stopped the clock, but we've established in this committee it is the members' time. So please continue, Mr. Brock.
You made conclusions that were so significant that you felt that these were proven facts of serious employee misconduct, so serious that you required the RCMP to investigate at least 2 criminal charges, fraud and bribery, and then later on in this report, you declare that there's absolutely no evidence of bribery, as outlined by Bottler AI in their allegations. You remember saying that? That to date there is no evidence of bribery? Did you actually share that with the RCMP? I bet you didn't.
That we have no...
Yeah. Did you share that with the RCMP?
We have provided information to the RCMP.
Did you share the fact that you have no evidence to support the allegation of bribery with the RCMP? Yes or no? It's a simple question, Mr. Lafleur.
I disagree. It's a yes or no question. We have provided...
Answer the question, Mr. Lafleur. Did you advise the RCMP that you uncovered no evidence of bribery? Yes or no?
The RCMP has the evidence that we have collected.
I'm going to interrupt you. We're out of time, but a very straightforward question has been put to you. Could you please respond in a yes or no fashion, Mr. Lafleur?
As to whether I've specifically told the RCMP we have found no evidence of... I'm just seeking clarity on that.
Could you repeat the question? Just a very quick
Certainly,
one.
for the 6th time, I'll repeat the question very slowly and carefully for you, Mr. Lafleur.
And be polite about it.
I will be, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Bottler AI raised concerns regarding bribery involving Christian Firth and Cameron McDonald. You raised that as a significant concern in your preliminary statement of fact. Paragraph 50 of your report indicates that there was no evidence to substantiate the allegation of fraud. My question is, did you share your opinion that this allegation of fraud was unsubstantiated to the RCMP, yes or no?
That's not what the report says.
Sorry?
With respect, that's not what I say in the report.
I can read it out.
I'm going to interrupt. I think we're going to get back to this in the next round, and we will re-clarify. Mr. Sousa, please go ahead.
Thank you for appearing here today. You know, it's infuriating. We have an ongoing investigation. You made clear that you're taking the steps necessary to provide for that investigation so you can have a proper outcome. Some are arguing that you may be withholding information during this process, but in fact, you are taking the necessary steps. What's appropriate to disclose now versus what you're going to come forward with at the end? needs to be understood, and I presume the line of questioning is to that effect. However, I also recognize that some of the prosecution efforts that this committee seems to be playing throughout this process, and now they're defending the very individuals that they prosecuted in the past and have made assertions that they have actually been dealing inappropriately and have been dealing in a way that is of misconduct. They've made that assertions. They've actually claimed that others and those individuals themselves have been lying to this committee, and now they're putting you under the gun for the same issue, and yet you're the one doing the investigation. So I'm just trying to comprehend, notwithstanding the antics here, that we get to the truth. And that's what they seem to be wanting, but they're making allegations themselves. And now they're prosecuting those very individuals. Now they're coming back trying to protect those individuals who they themselves have accused of lying. And we're not accusing you of anything. Let's be clear. We want to make certain that the investigation takes its proper course and that the results and the outcome is best understood. And I'm having some difficulty trying to understand how, well, first I have to ask, is it common to use general contractors, then they subcontract? That's normal.
It is something that's allowed within procurement rules based on my understanding.
And those things come with contracts.
Correct.
And then they come before the government in terms of what is being proposed and what is understood and what is agreed to during those contracts, correct?
Part of the process.
So how do you investigate a situation when there are no contracts? There's no contracts with a general contractor. There's no contract with a subcontractor. So, and the allegations are engaged in those areas, but there's nothing of legal consequence. So, how do you proceed to investigate something that doesn't actually have contracts?
So I can speak generally that what we investigate would be around whether the individuals with authority exercise their delegation appropriately, whether the processes were followed, whether the various procurement policies were respected.
So can you explain the difference between an internal investigation and something that the RCMP would conduct?
So our investigations are with respect to whether the code of conduct was followed by employees in the course of their duties. The RCMP would be responsible for investigating potential criminality.
And you, since out of your own accord, you provided the RCMP with an indication of that, and you've given them and released information to them. Have you had any discussions subsequent to that with the RCMP?
We have engaged with the RCMP throughout the investigation to provide them information as per their lawful requests.
And this is specific to Bottler's allegations?
That's correct.
And where there is no contracts?
There was no contract with Bottler.
Right. So some here are claiming that maybe you're withholding information from us. Is that true?
Not at all.
And the information that you have, you've given it to the RCMP. And then they have then had, but they haven't conducted an outcome. They haven't determined any guilt, right?
That's my understanding.
Have you determined any guilt?
No, our investigation is ongoing.
So what is there that you can explain to us that would give us comfort that there's some wrongdoing? At this point, you're investigating any possibility of that, correct?
We're investigating the possibility of that, and there have been extensive disclosures to this committee pursuant to your production orders. You have a significant amount of evidence to look at as well.
Right. And as you can tell through this committee hearings, we've had a lot of discussions around the activities, not just of Bottler, but other possible allegations that could be done. And, of course, the Ombudsman came back with a number of recommendations. Are you aware of those recommendations?
I am.
Did you participate or cooperate with the Ombudsman during that procedure?
Yes, so I have responsibility for security screening for the agency, so we provided information around security screening questions that they had.
And there were practices that were explained that I understand has been prevalent throughout decades, even under the previous government. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that some of the issues raised have been systemic in government for some
I know that some members across have suggested that something has just happened, which is not the case in terms of providing for, especially during the case of the pandemic, a lot of contracts were initiated, but then they've subsequently used their services to do other functions. Is that correct? I think they call them swaps or bait and whatever they're called.
Bait and switch or something like that. I can't speak to those details.
Yeah, have you seen that occur in the past?
I haven't had that many procurement-related investigations, so I have not.
Okay. And do you Do you foresee anything of negativity there, or is there something wrong that's happened, or did the ombudsman say that there was any wrongdoing or any misconduct?
I don't want to misspeak. I haven't fully reviewed the Ombudsman's report. I do note that they had concerns and that we've taken steps to address them.
Do you know what our response has been in respect to the Ombudsman's report? Are you aware of cooperation or recommendations put forward?
Just a brief answer, Mr. Fleur. We're past our time.
The committee, sorry?
Yeah, no. The CBSA.
I am aware that we've strengthened procurement practices.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Mr. Lafleur, I've read several documents. In terms of Butler's allegations to the CBSA, include the word bribery, because I've read documents and I don't remember the word bribery being included in those allegations. I couldn't say I don't have the report in front of me, but I don't believe so. Well, I'll check again then, because I think I have a good memory, but you never know. Now, do the documents that were provided to the committee, are they included, rather, in your investigation? Because some documents, I believe, have been deleted. Let's say emails, for example. So is it possible that some emails or documents might have been deleted? Well, during our investigation, I have access to all information from the agency, including what we've received, yes. Now, what happens if emails have been deleted before you've had an opportunity to see them? What can you do in order to access those emails? Well, our investigations, our administrative investigations, we cannot necessarily go and seize computers, for example. So we are limited in what we can do. If we have a copy of an email, well, we'll have that copy on the same day, but the agency system, the government system, only gives you a period of 30 days in terms of backup. So the emails might still be there. And so it all depends on when the email would have been deleted. Well, do you have access to those backups? Yes. Thank you. Do I still have time?
Go ahead, Mr. Bachrach.
Merci. I'll pick up where my colleague just left off. This question of the deletion of emails, I think there are many questions swirling around this, and I understand there are aspects of this you probably can't speak to, but perhaps the question I'll ask is, over the course of your investigation, is there any correspondence that's either been referenced in ATIP requests or referenced in interviews with witnesses that you have not been able to obtain through the avenues that are available to you? You mentioned you can't seize computers, but I assume you would have access to the CBSA's servers and central repositories of correspondence. Is there any information that has been referenced, specifically correspondence, that's been referenced in ATIP requests or referenced in interviews with witnesses that you haven't been able to access?
The lack of documentation on the procurement files is something that has been noted, and I believe the procurement ombudsman speaks to that as well. But I have seen no evidence to date, again speaking generally, not about any specifics, of evidence being withheld from ATIP requests or being actively deleted to keep them from our investigation.
Okay, thanks for that. I think one of the lines of questioning that my colleague Mr. Brock has brought up relates to this preliminary statement of fact. I haven't seen that statement of fact. However, he made some pretty, I think some pretty colorful allegations about your own competency as an investigator. You referenced in your opening remarks the terms of reference under which your investigation is taking place, that there are procedures that are set out by CBSA for internal investigations. Does anyone sort of check your work as an investigator? Is there any way for us the committee to confirm whether or not indeed the preliminary statement of fact followed the protocols and procedures that are established by the agency? How does that process work?
So you can see the policy on government security, which is something that's open to anyone, and the requirements therein relating to the sharing of information when there have been concerns raised. We do engage in a yearly quality assurance process through a third party that comes in and looks at our work and gives us recommendations with regards to our investigations and in respect to policy. So that's something that we have systemically within.
That is our time. Thanks very much. Back to you, Mr. Brock, please.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 50, page 10 of the Statement of Fact report as it relates to Cameron McDonald is largely
Okay, hold on. We're just going to jump to the... Well, no, everyone's probably wants to see Brock, right? So we're going to put on Brock. MP Brock, there's only a few minutes left of this committee meeting before they go on break. But, yeah, so it's MP Brock. We'll have him on, and then we're going to shift over, at least I will, I'll shift to the election debate that's been raging on in Parliament. A few minutes of that, and then we're going to go on to, I will move on to the Indu study, where they're looking at data harvesting, basically data harvesting of companies and that whole spectrum of issue but everyone's fully aware of. Sometimes I remember for me the initial data harvesting that irked me. I was on an experimental, a search engine, and that was only experimental, right? The beta. I opted into it. And this is just before it even started. I used to get all kinds of ads before. They were always like, because I was male and they knew that much, it would be girl ads. You know what I mean? These nudity girls. And it's kind of annoying. It's kind of annoying, And then after I opted into this beta thing, the search engine, I won't say which one, but the one that everyone uses, and it was like watching obviously what I was searching and stuff like that, and it started giving me advertisements specifically to what I was like looking up, and I'm like, just looked it up, and I'm like, holy crap, I just looked it up, and you're giving me an advertising of this new type of plastic plumbing pipe that came out, and it was actually really interesting. I still remember the ad. It was like 45 minutes. I watched the whole damn thing. Clicked it on the side of it was on a website, and I clicked it on the side of a website. It had nothing to do with that site. It wasn't like a YouTube ad. It was on the site, and I was like, this is amazing. This is the first time that I had an ad that was actually useful to me, to someone, you know what I mean, to my interests. And it wasn't just a blanketed, hey, you're a male, here's boobs, click on boobs all the time. And, and I found that really good. And now that is a part of, there's two parts of this. It's like the double-edged sword, as someone explained it to me, that they're just wanting to sell you things and make your experience better. That is the driving force behind a lot of looking into you, right? To make your experience better. The more it knows you, the better it can deal with you, right? And then there's the other side is, well, will they be going too far and pushing, my habits or my weaknesses beyond? And that's the subject and the debate that's raging everywhere, I think, and no one's really hitting that on the needle of what it is, because it's a duel. This is a beautiful thing. Getting advertisements that I like, that I enjoy. It's like interacting with me. It's fantastic to me. It makes my internet experience better. Whereas, exploiting my weaknesses, if this is happening, and I imagine, of course, some companies would be, is the other side of it, or selling your advertising to people that will use it against you, right? Nefarious activities of Lord knows what. But let's listen to what Ford has said. What do you think about that? Leave your comments on the side.
Paragraph 50, page 10 of the statement of fact.
Here's MP
report
Brock.
as it relates to Cameron McDonald is largely redacted. It starts unredacted as follows. It is important to note that the true motivation behind these actions are unclear, and that while the Butler AI complaint appears to indicate that Christian Firth solicited a bribe for Cameron McDonald exhibit number 10, there has been no evidence gathered to date in this regard. I'll take it by your non-response, sir, that you don't want to share the truth as to whether or not that important piece of your investigation was shared with the RCMP. Now, on the issue of deleting emails, Mindone, just to clarify, has never been the subject of this particular Project Helios investigation. Is that correct?
As was published
The investigation?
if I could answer. So
I'm asking you, is it part of the investigation or not?
on December 11th, I received allegations, as has been made public, relating to Mr. Doan.
Is he still subject of an investigation?
That review is on.
That review of whether or not he's going to be the subject of an investigation is underway, so that's a possibility.
The review of the allegations we received.
So that's a possibility. Correct? Now, Mindone confirmed this, and through ATIPs delivered to CBSA has confirmed that Mindone has 4 years worth of highly relevant, sensitive emails between the years of 2018 to 2022, which not only captures the pandemic and the ArriveCan scandal, but as well as the Butler AI investigations, have just mysteriously been corrupted. He's not taking responsibility for deliberately deleting that. The approximate amount of those emails is roughly 7 gigabytes or 1,700 emails. You would agree with me, sir, that emails are supposed to be...
Sorry, Mr. Brock.
Sorry, Mr. Brock, point of order.
Yeah.
Mr. Beckerack, and I don't believe any of us has actually seen this statement of facts. Do you have a copy that you can share with us? Because we're looking for it. I don't think.
I'll address that. I'm the only one on the committee that has a copy of it.
So can we have it distributed so we can?
No. I'll discuss it on Wednesday. I think Mr. Brock indicated he received the information from 2 of our witnesses who have received it.
So we're not allowed to see it?
I'll discuss it Wednesday. But I'm the only one with the copy of it, right? Myself and the clerk are the only people with the copy of it right now. But I'll address it.
But Mr. Brock got it from a witness?
Not from the committee and not from CBSA.
So how did Mr. Brock get it? It's a point of order. How is it that certain committee members are receiving it and not all committee members?
This is not a point of order, Mr. Sousa. I've explained to you. I'm the only one in the committee that has a copy of it, myself and the clerk. No one else has received a committee from this
Mr. Brock
committee.
has a copy.
I'm sure Mr. Brock also has copies of ATIPs that have not sent to us. I have copies of ATIP that have not been sent to the committee. You have emails that have not been made because they were sent to him separately. I think Mr. Brock, at the very beginning of the meeting, if you were listening, indicated he received it from the witnesses, which I assume are Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, who have received a copy. So, yeah, I think it was discussed at the very beginning of the meeting. Mr. Brock, you're at 2 minutes and 10 seconds, so you have 2:50 left. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mindone at the time was the vice president of the CBSA. You'd agree with me, sir, that deleting emails is an extremely serious offense.
It would be a breach of the code of conduct to willfully delete emails.
And it's incumbent on an IT professional, as Mindone was, to protect work emails dealing with official matters, correct?
It is part of our responsibilities. Yes.
And the level of seriousness increases dependent on the position that a public servant holds. In this case, a low-level administrative data entry individual is vastly different in terms of the serious scale than the vice president of the CBSA when you reference deleting emails. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. The level.
When was the president, Aaron O'Gorman, informed about Mr. Doan's deleted emails?
We have not concluded that there were any deleted emails.
When was she informed, sir?
She was informed of the allegations when I received them.
Of the deleted emails?
The allegations as I received them.
When was it?
December 11th is when I received them. I can't recall exactly which date I would have.
When was the Auditor General notified of 4 years' worth of deleted relevant emails?
Again, one point of clarification, I have no evidence that there has been deletion at this point. We are looking into the matter.
Can you answer the question, Mr. Lafleur? When was the Auditor General notified of 4 years' worth of a Vice President's deleted email account? When was she notified, and by whom?
So I can say that during our various engagements with the Office of the Auditor General, we have provided them with all of the information that we had available.
Did you inform the Auditor General yourself, sir, or someone under your control that the Auditor General received evidence of 4 years' worth of deleted emails by Min Doan, Vice President? Yes or no?
Again, I'm not sure what you're referencing. I did meet with the OAG.
Chair, can we get some clarity, please? My questions are very direct.
Yeah, Mr. Lafleur,
And this witness has a hard
we do ask
time.
you just respond and just a direct answer, please. If it's a yes or no, please a direct yes or no, but otherwise a direct answer so we can move on.
Did you notify the Auditor General of 4 years' worth of deleted emails?
I notified the Auditor General that I had received allegations to that.
And when did you notify her?
In December, after I received the allegations.
December of 23?
23.
Okay. Was the Treasury Board Secretariat informed?
No.
Did you inform the RCMP of potentially 4 years' worth of highly confidential, relevant emails?
We are required to report potential criminality. I have no evidence of that at this time.
Thank you, Mr.
Wow. No evidence of potentially deliberately deleting emails, and that is not criminality to you?
Mr. Brock, that is our time.
Wow.
Mr. Baines, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lafleur, for joining us today.
Ask if it's confidential.
So the statement of fact, which we've been talking about in the last few lines of questioning here, is that confidential?
It is.
So the witness sharing it with a member opposite, is that some type of breach of any sort?
I'm not aware of any sharing that would have occurred.
Well, Mr. Chair here had confirmed that Mr. Brock received it from a witness. So would that be a breach of any sort in this investigation? Is this in a way undermining the investigation that's ongoing? Are they supposed to be talking about this?
I would say it depends on who it came from. Obviously, I would have concerns if that had come from a member of my investigation team.
Well, the Mr. Chair here just confirmed that it came from a witness, that Mr. Brock directly received it from one of the witnesses. Which witness, we don't know.
If it was to somebody who it was provided and it may be considered their personal information, they are free to share it as they see fit.
Okay, so it's there, but it's confidential. Then you just said it's confidential. You can't share it, but a witness can share it?
If it's about them, they
could
share it.
So in the scope of your duties, are you concerned? You mentioned that there's been some things, some systemic issues with respect to contracts and documentation and these sorts of things. Are you concerned within your investigation now and you're uncovering things, you're finding things, if there's widespread corruption in your organization?
I've seen no indication of widespread corruption. We provided information to the President in the fall of 2023, after which she took a number of measures to strengthen procurement within the CBSA. I'm comfortable that those measures are serving their purpose.
So this incident specifically that you're seeing, is this like the first of its kind that sort of, in a way, like we've been extremely confused. It's been like a tangled web, and there's still a lot of clarity that needs to come forward here. So is this an isolated incident in your time that you've seen?
It is the first time that I see a file of this complexity and seriousness relating to procurement, yes.
Okay, so if you're looking at like the Treasury Board guidelines for discipline, like in which circumstances might public servants' presence at work undermine or impede an investigation, as described in the Treasury Board's guidelines?
So I can speak to the Treasury Board standard on security screening, which outlines when an employee may need to be suspended. And speaking generally, it's when they would represent a potential security risk to the organization, to people, information, or assets, or to the conduct of the investigation. So again, speaking generally, if someone is under investigation in the workplace and still has access to witnesses, they may try to influence them, so that would be a concern. So they may be removed from the workplace to protect the integrity of the investigation.
So, seeing how Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano are suspended, like, is this one of the risks that you thought that or CBSA is seeing, that they may have access to information, and that's why they've been limited to that access and been suspended?
So Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano are not employees of the CBSA, so I can't speak to the decision to remove them from the workplace. I can say that generally speaking, it is normal in the course of an investigation for management to assess whether there is a need to mitigate potential risk pending the conclusion of the investigation. In the case where they have identified a potential risk, they have the responsibility to ensure that temporary measures are put in place to protect the organization, to protect the workplace, until an investigation is completed and final decisions can be taken.
There's been, we've received some feedback from some of the witnesses that have appeared here before, and they've declared that there's some challenges with their health, that they're unable to come back. Has this limited your investigation in any way?
I can't speak to any discussions that we may have had with potential witnesses. I will say that I have great sympathy for the stress that anyone involved in an investigation, whether it be a witness or someone who is under investigation, may face, particularly with the level of public scrutiny that this file has had. I can appreciate how that is extremely stressful.
Gentlemen, Mr. Genuis, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lafleur, you're tasked with providing an investigation internally into what happened with ArriveCan. I am interested in what seems to be the difference in the level of interest you're applying to allegations against different individuals. Your preliminary work at least seems to suggest a profound interest in allegations against Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, and a surprising lack of interest against Mr. Doan. I note that Mr. Doan faces serious allegations related to the deletion of documents, and that no provisional action seems to have been taken against him, while Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano have been suspended without pay. Could you provide the committee with any explanation as to your relative much greater attention to allegations against Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano compared to allegations against Mr. Doan?
I would disagree that there's been an undue attention given to one over the other. We received allegations from Bottler in November of 2022. It would be expected for that investigation to have proceeded much further than new allegations that I received in December of 2023.
Okay, so your explanation is that you received the allegations against Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano earlier, yet Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald received a letter notifying them of the investigations against the allegations against them on November 27th of this year. That was, again, suspiciously 20 days after their damning testimony before this committee. How are we to understand the fact that allegedly your investigation had been going on for a year, and yet they received a letter notifying them of the investigation in November of this year?
If I can have a minute, perhaps, to explain that timeline. So we did initiate an investigation in November 2022, considering the potential criminality. When we have interactions with police, we do respect the integrity of their investigation. And in this case, we could not proceed with interviews or with notifying the individuals under investigation with respect to the RCMP investigation. So since we're talking about the same witnesses, the same evidence, we were limited in how we can proceed without negatively impact the RCMP investigation. That scenario changed when the Globe and Mail issued their report on October 4th of 2023, and holding back on our investigation became a moot point at that point, which is why.
And yet it was still after their testimony on November 7th. Like this, even what you just said doesn't make any sense from a timeline perspective, because the Globe story that you referenced was the beginning of October, and yet it was only after their testimony before this committee that they subsequently heard from you that they were under investigation. This whole thing is just bizarre in terms of the investigation, because you said investigation started a year ago, but somehow it was only within a couple weeks of them coming before this committee to give damning negative testimony about the government in response to questions they were asked, that they were told that they were under investigation. They were subsequently suspended without pay. Meanwhile, we have these very serious allegations against Min Doan that involve hiding information, deleting emails, and as far as I know, there's been no action taken against him. The clearest difference to me between Mr. Doan and Mr. McDonald and Utano is that Mr. McDonald and Utano gave very blunt, critical testimony, whereas Mr. Doan obfuscated, prevaricated, didn't answer questions, and gave every indication of trying to defend the party line. And I get the same impression here that you who are subject to the leadership of CBSA are looking at one set of allegations against one set of individuals and not against others. Maybe the best way to go from that is to ask you, sir, about your own reporting chain of command. You have characterized your investigation as independent, but you're not independent, are you? You're part of the department. You're subject to the authority of the department, and you're movable, reassignable at any time. Is that correct?
Of course, I do not have the independence of the OAG or the procurement ombudsman, for example, but I do have the space and time to conduct my work independently within the agency.
Okay, you would like us to believe that you have space and time to act independently, but substantively in terms of your role, you are not independent. There are no independent attributes about your role. And you even told us that you're informally providing information to your superiors at CBSA on an ongoing basis.
To wrap up,
you are not an independent investigator. You are their investigator, subject to the authority structure within CBSA. Do you think that compromises the integrity of your investigation?
Very, very brief answer, please.
It is normal for departments to investigate matters that occurred within their departments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lafleur, for being here with us here today and bringing your testimony. Over the course of the last number of months, we heard testimony that there's allegations that CVs were being inflated in order to win contracts. So bona fides were being inflated to win contracts. Is that enough grounds, in your experience, to proceed from a preliminary review to a formal investigation, just on those grounds? If someone is caught inflating CVs to win contracts, is that typically enough to move from a preliminary report to a formal report?
So maybe one point of clarification, if I could. I wouldn't be responsible for investigating the actions of vendors. Only of employees of the CBSA.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. It's a good answer. Wanted to ask you, how many procurement-related cases have you investigated? You've been doing this for 15 years. Are the vast majority of the cases related to procurement? Is a small subsection related to procurement? Just curious if you can speak to that.
It's a very small subsection.
It's a very small subsection. Okay. in your experience, this case that you're examining right now, how normal is it? How out of the ordinary is it? If you can maybe speak to that a little bit, provide us a little bit of context in terms of what we're looking at here.
So my presence before committee today is highly abnormal. As someone who is responsible for conducting an administrative investigation that is ongoing, being asked to speak publicly is not normal, and it is a challenge. I do have responsibility to ensure the integrity of the process and procedural fairness for the individuals under investigation. And I also have a responsibility to ensure that our investigation ultimately is able, if there is wrongdoing identified, to lead to accountability. So while I have great respect for the work of this committee, it is difficult to answer some of the questions relating to those very pointed points.
I know you can't speak specifically to this case. I understand that, but I just wanted to ask the specifics of this case. Are there things that you have not seen in your experience in your 15 years that you've seen in this particular case that you're investigating?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you tell us when the preliminary review was completed?
So the preliminary review, it happened relatively quick. So I would say by December of 2022, we had evidence that at least some of the allegations appeared to be substantiated, and we would have been in a position to proceed formally with the investigation at that time, were it not for the ongoing criminal investigation.
How much time did it take before moving from the preliminary to the formal, roughly speaking? What are we talking? Is it a matter of days, weeks that you make the switch to a
Generally
formal?
speaking, it can take up to 7 weeks. We give ourselves 45 business days.
Okay. To switch to the formal.
To move to formal.
Who makes that decision? Who makes that decision? Is that your decision, or does someone make that decision for you and say, okay, we want you to move into a formal?
In the normal course of an investigation, it would be the investigator and the responsible manager that would make those decisions.
Okay, so in that case, it's yourself with management makes that decision together?
My management team.
Your management team?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I actually have a question for the chair, if that's okay. Thank you, Michelle. I just wanted to know, Mr. Chair, when did you become aware that a member of this committee had the preliminary statement of fact?
Pretty much today, I understand such details. But I'm not sure if he has the full. I'm going to stop. Well, I'm not sure if he's got the full report. I was intending to discuss the release of the report because there are some issues around that we have to decide as a committee. I was going to do it Wednesday, but I think we're going to move that up.
Okay, so this new report, they want to discuss it. It's not going to be discussed today, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. It's coming forward. This is the big thing. Are they going to be discussing this? Is it going to be passed? Are they going to be actually see it? Are Canadians going to see what is in this report of what happened? We don't know. Well, we'll see here. We're going to be shifting shortly to the House of Commons. Just do a short clip of the election, just to see how the parties are weighing in on the election reform, because it could be quite a big thing.
In camera, right after we finish our committee business.
Okay, you can understand my concerns here. It seems that there's certain members, and I'm not sure if the other members of the other Conservative MPs have access to this information.
This is very often, though. There are certain MPs that have ATIPs that have other reports that others do not have. But I think that's up to the members to discuss that with or do their research on that. But
no, just as a matter of process, I would expect that the moment members of this committee, and especially the chair, have information asymmetrical information that is distributed, or that is at least that we are made aware of the fact that that information is now out there. I think that is really important.
Point of order, Chair.
Committee.
Yeah, it's fine. Continue your point of order, and that is your time. Then we'll discuss the actual distribution of it.
Yeah,
today.
Mr. Chair, I just think a point is getting confused here. Obviously, if in his capacity as chair, the chair is sent information for the committee, he should be distributing that in a symmetrical way to all or to none. However, if members, clearly all of us have different levels of information that we get from different conversations we have. That's extremely normal. Members of the government presumably have conversations with government ministers, government political staff, and know things that we don't know, and we have conversations that they're not part of, and so everybody knows things that somebody else doesn't know. The question is
going to
around...
shift off to the Parliament now. See what's going on in the House. Just watch your ears. There'll be a jump of sound. But there, you got it. First, they were discussing the free trade agreement. Actually, here, well, since there's quite a few people talking about it, there earlier, about an hour ago. Okay, here's a quick.
Silent Powell.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for her intervention. You know, the concern here is that...
sorry, I'm lining this up. It's a Ukraine free trade deal, and Marilyn Gladue has a point. Here we are.
Just doesn't make sense to a sovereign nation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton in 20 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. What I would say is I meet regularly with the many Ukrainians who have come. I want to thank the Save Ukraine Sarnia-Lambton group and people like Dr. Cassandra Taylor, who have provided supports and welcomed our family of Ukrainians in. They certainly know unequivocally I support and unequivocally the Conservative Party supports. And I would remind everyone that we already have a trade agreement and that Ukraine...
And we have to resume debate. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me begin by quoting a former colleague of mine. Ukraine is defending itself against unjustified aggression, the Kremlin's naked attempt to destroy a country's statehood, infrastructure, and identity. Full collective support for Ukraine's victory is the right, legal, moral, military, and strategic course of action. I strongly support this position. Putin's war of aggression is not just against Ukraine. His war machine attempts to undermine the Western consensus for democracy, the rule of law, and the pursuit of equality of opportunity. And so, now to Canada's role in this fight and the substance of this bill. This bill proposes updates to Canada's existing free trade agreement with Ukraine. I support free trade with Ukraine. I do not support every measure in this bill. And I take particular issue with the Liberals' inclusion of a carbon tax within the text. And that is because in the Canadian context, the Liberal carbon tax has dramatically increased the cost of living for every single one of the people I represent, all while failing to bring Canada anywhere close to meeting its emissions targets. It's not solving the urgent question of climate change. It is a clearly flawed policy that creates economic harm, and those who adhere to its ideology without questions put up roadblocks that have stifled the policy innovation needed to reduce emissions. I can simultaneously hold the position that I support free trade with Ukraine, I support the victory of Ukraine over Putin, and oppose a carbon tax. There are tens of millions of other Canadians who feel the exact same way. For the Liberals or the NDP or the Bloc or anyone else to suggest that to develop ways for Canada to support Ukraine, that I have to capitulate on my position on a carbon tax, misses the point of democracy, which is what we are ostensibly trying to fight for. In a dire crisis situation such as the one Ukraine finds itself in, fighting against the war of aggression being waged by Putin, it is the Liberal government that should have been working collaboratively to find a unified path forward. If they are unwilling to budge on the inclusion of a carbon tax in this agreement, then the onus was on them to build consensus with the Canadian public and acknowledge that we can have internal differences on a carbon tax while supporting Ukraine. It is a dangerous, deadly game for the Prime Minister of Canada and anyone in this place to repeatedly suggest that if a Canadian opposes a carbon tax, they must support Putin. This is a disgusting, morally bankrupt, and fundamentally anti-democratic politically motivated aspersion that serves only to divide our country at a time when it desperately needs leadership that unifies it. It does not help Ukraine. It does not help Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. If the Prime Minister eschewed this approach when he failed to table this agreement in Parliament 90 calendar days prior to the commencement of negotiations. In February of 2020, ahead of the renegotiation of the CUSMA agreement, the minister at the time made the following commitment: to require that a notice of intent to enter into negotiation towards a new free trade agreement be tabled in the House of Commons at least 90 calendar days prior to the commencement of negotiations. That didn't happen in this case. There was no collaborative effort. And again, I want to reemphasize that I will oppose the Liberal carbon tax. It does not help my constituents. It is not reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is not meeting emissions targets. It is a flawed and failed policy. I will simultaneously stand here and support Putin while saying that anybody who is suggesting that we should be making politics over this is actually helping Putin. When I listen to this line of attack, it disgusts me because I know the people who are saying these things know better. And if they want to earn the votes of Canadians, they should be looking at the issues that are pushing their polls so far south, as opposed to desperately trying to cling to some sort of false narrative that only divides our country and only helps our country's enemies. It's disgusting, and it needs to stop. Seriously. Earlier today, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell would not commit to asking his government to seize or to repurpose seized Russian assets. I'm not going to stand here and call him a Putin supporter. So no one on the other bench should suggest just because I firmly, strongly, backed by evidence, reject a carbon tax, that I somehow support that. That is exactly what the Russian war machine wants. That is the exact narrative that they want, and it needs to stop. At the same time, what this agreement should be doing is looking at ways to materially help our allies. Today, the leader of the Conservative Party, actually just moments ago, issued a press release saying that the Prime Minister must send CRV rockets to Ukraine. He's talking about ways that Canada should be sending surplus weapons to help our allies in their fight against Putin. That is a material way that we should be helping, not casting aspersions and trying to divide our country over this issue. The other thing that I want to, Madam Speaker, implore every member of this House as strongly as I can, I am going to read a small paragraph from a colleague in Ukraine, a note that she sent to me. The value of frozen Russian assets is estimated to be at least $320 billion. With no reasonable prospect for Russia paying compensation to Ukraine anytime soon, and Ukraine's need for both short and long-term financial assistance, confiscations of Russian assets becomes the only just and viable option, especially in view of the fact that up to $1 trillion will be needed for Ukraine to fully recover. Our partners, and this is from a Ukrainian MP, our partners' taxpayers should not shoulder the burden of Ukraine's recovery alone, especially as they froze and can use assets of aggressors responsible for the devastation. Madam Speaker, there are senior government officials in Ukraine today. Some of those senior government officials have suggested that Canada's military is impotent. If they are going to take that posture, then at the very least, what Canada should be doing is using the laws that are already in place, that have already been supported by all members in this House, to repurpose seized Russian assets and lead a G7 charge to force Western allies to do exactly what Ukraine is crying out for in this case. Putin's roar of aggression they need to compensate Ukraine. They are the aggressor. And at the very least, if Canada is true, and if Canada is going to try and make any sort of case that we are actually some sort of broker in the world, that we have any sort of relevancy, this is low-hanging fruit. We should be the first country to be doing this. We have the legal mechanisms. There is nothing in this agreement about that. Absolutely nothing
The government has not. They have had this tool at their disposal for 2 years now, and they haven't moved on this. Am I going to accuse the government of not supporting of Ukraine because of that? I could. Instead, I'd rather that they just move on it. This is an issue that transcends petty partisan politics and the desperate attempt of a prime minister who is 16 points behind in the polls to try to cling onto a disgusting life raft for his political gain. We have to work together. Our global democracy is at stake, folks. Right now, our allies are fighting a war that, like, we have lost the plot here, honestly. If somebody stands up, Madam Speaker, and dares question the fact that I will stand up for my constituents against a policy that does nothing to help them, that does nothing to help climate change, I have watched this debate. I have watched pundits. I have watched former colleagues say, well, you know, maybe the Conservatives should just capitulate on this. Absolutely not. It is the role of the government to build consensus during a time of crisis, and they failed to do that. So I beg them, do something that resembles work. Work with our partners to stop the funding of the Russian war machine by transporting more of Canada's natural gas overseas. That was low-hanging. That should have been in this agreement, but it's not. But at the very least, today, like, there's $300 billion. That's more than the entire sum total of all of the aid that's been sent to Ukraine. And Canada could be leading the charge on this. And instead, we have Liberal members of Parliament standing here and saying these things. They have lost the plot. They have lost the plot. And Canadians know this. Canadians aren't buying this. They're not buying this. So let's do better, Madam Speaker. I implore, I beg the government to rethink their posture, both on the carbon tax, on their political position on this issue, as well as dragging their feet on common sense measures that Conservatives have been calling for some time, that there's already consensus for in the House of Commons and across the country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. In every trade agreement, there's all sorts of compromises that are made. Sometimes you agree with something, sometimes you disagree with something. You take a look at the overall agreement in itself.
Sorry, I couldn't find the button. Yeah, okay. So someone is complaining, well, it's not on the label. Well, a lot of people are discussing the Canada-Ukraine in the comments, so I wanted to highlight the Conservatives' point. And the Conservatives are saying, I know I shouldn't bring it up because I'm leaning Conservative, but they didn't support it because the carbon tax was in the bill. Well, the problem is with that, here I'm reading this off of the OECD. Okay, so this is, the people that know the tax. In 2021, explicit carbon prices in Ukraine consist of carbon taxes, which cover 35.4% of greenhouse gas emissions. Wow. So they're way ahead of us, and GHG emissions and CO2e. In total, 43.8 of GHG emissions in Ukraine are subject to a positive net effective carbon rate, ECR. In 2021, it's unchanged in 2008. And they're trying to join the union. They're trying to join the European Union. And they're going to have no choice at that point to be putting carbon taxes on. Okay, here we have MP Cooper doing I believe, a very highlighted and energetic speech, animated, I'll say. Okay, so on this election reform, and then I'll jump back to the original person who put it on. It was his NDP. So here it is.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. L'honorable député, the honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on Motion 86, a motion that calls on the government to establish a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. While I appreciate the spirit in which this motion has been put forward by the honourable member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, I'm unable to support it for reasons that I will set out. I would acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that a citizens' assembly can play a constructive role in making recommendations around alternative electoral systems. After all, a citizens' assembly.
So in the description of this is what the bill is, and it's set forth by the NDP member from Ladysmith. I'm sorry, I forget the MP's last name. Lisa MP, NDP, and it's written in there. So if you want to see exactly what this is about, that's it. And we're going to go to her speech after we have MP Cooper, because he's one of my favorite MPs for... he's an orator. I like his oration skills. He's kind of factual. I don't want to say nerdy, but he gets into facts, and that's what I personally enjoy. And he's fairly hard hitting at mostly at times, like, you know, with respect. Okay, so let's hear him.
Is comprised of private citizens who are selected randomly as part of a lottery process who are non-partisan. Accordingly, a citizens' assembly is well positioned to consult, to deliberate, and to design alternative electoral systems. Indeed, citizens' assemblies have played precisely this role twice in Canada, in British Columbia and in Ontario in 2004 and 2006, respectively. However, that is not precisely what this motion calls for. Rather, this motion calls for the establishment of a citizens' assembly with a mandate to, quote, determine if electoral reform is recommended for Canada, and if so, to recommend specific measures that would foster a healthier democracy. And so, based on the wording of the motion, if the Citizens' Assembly determined that electoral reform were desirable, presumably it would go about making recommendations on alternative systems, but the wording on its face is somewhat ambiguous. It isn't clear. But what is clear is what is missing from the motion, and that is any mention that there be a referendum of Canadians to decide whether to adopt any new electoral system. Mr. Speaker, a citizens' assembly on its own is completely insufficient to determine any new electoral system. Likewise, I would submit it would be inappropriate for politicians to make such a determination, for example, by way of a bill introduced in Parliament, having regard for the fact that all of us have partisan political interests that would influence decisions around the design of any new electoral system. Nothing short of a referendum will suffice. A referendum is needed in order that any new electoral system have the moral weight and legitimacy that would be needed. Indeed, anything less would likely cast doubts amongst segments of Canadians that certain partisan actors had taken advantage or manipulated the electoral system for partisan or ideological gain, which would undermine democracy and undermine confidence in any new electoral system. And so, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support the motion on that basis. I cannot support a motion that could be construed as recommending a process whereby a citizens' assembly on its own would determine a new electoral system as opposed to recommending alternative electoral systems. Now, with that, I would like to make a few observations more broadly on the matter of electoral reform. Proponents of this motion make the case that this is something that Canadians want. Indeed, within the motion itself, there is a poll that is cited that indicates a sizable percentage of Canadians would like to see a citizens' assembly. I would respectfully question whether this is something that Canadians want, and I question it not on the basis of a poll. I base it on results of votes of Canadians in 7 referendums held over the past 20 years in 3 provinces. In 5 out of 7 referendums, Canadians, when given the choice, have voted against electoral reform and in favor of the status quo, first past the post system. Indeed, the only referendum in which a clear majority of voters elected to adopt a new electoral system was in the 2005 referendum in British Columbia, which 57% of voters gave the green light for electoral reform, but it didn't meet the threshold for implementation. There were 2 subsequent referendums in British Columbia in which more than 60% of voters opted for the status quo. And although it may be unfashionable to say, perhaps the reason voters have opted for the status quo is because the first past the post electoral system has served Canadian democracy well. There are many merits to the first past the post electoral system, including the fact that it is straightforward. It can best be summed up as the candidate with the most votes wins. What could be more straightforward than that?
All right, I want to put this point on that this MP, Cooper, I'm sorry I'm interjecting, but I am. He has been speaking for 45 minutes, and you can see the plethora of different topics and facts. He's coming up with numbered facts. He's not looking at a paper. He's not he's not reading this, and very, very little looking at his notes even today. My point is, he is the most prepared I've ever seen him or many other MPs. Pierre Poilievre is one of the few MPs who can speak. That Kevin Lermo of the Liberals is another one who can speak on facts without having to use their notes to find out what the hell the truth is. So there's very few MPs, just because there's so much to know, right? And basically I'm saying is that he knows his file. He obviously knows this file, which is a specific. It's just a private members bill kind of thing from the NDP, which isn't going to be passed. So he has a lot of background knowledge he must have already had researching on electoral reform, and his opinions are not, I don't believe, have been formulated today. So I want to kind of give a hats off to this type of speech where it's not. I don't mind if they're reading it, but if you can see that they're reading it and they're obviously unaware of what they're saying, you know what I mean? They're just saying what they're told. That's when it's like kind of frustrating. I love an MP who knows his job and loves his job. I don't need a superstar in there I had this in my plumbing. I know I'm going on a diatribe, but I had a guy who was really, really, really smart, didn't want to work at the company, didn't want to be there. And he sucked as a worker comparative to this other guy who was not bright at all, had a cannabis problem at work, but he had enthusiasm. I could put him on bigger jobs on the project because of the enthusiasm, and he wanted to be there. And to me, and he put the extra effort in, whereas the guy who had the background knowledge and the skill put no effort into it, so he did actually less work. It was awful, and it was my lesson on it. And this is another one. Well, it's a saying. I want a man who knows what he does and loves what he does. So I'll pull up that quote in a second because I mangled it. So I'm going to read a couple comments. What's going on here in the comments? Ontario, Federal 11 Ontario also gives $160 billion to. I don't know what this is. Yeah, that's why we have gangs of police. That's, gang. Okay, let's listen to him. I don't know what's going on in the comments.
Democratic. It is based on the premise that each voter is equal. One person, one vote, with each vote weighted equally. That is in contrast to alternative systems where some votes count more than once. based on second and third ballot choices, for example. As former Prime Minister, current Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, observed in a column that he wrote in The Telegraph in 2011, the first past the post system produces winners, whereas alternative voting systems in some instances produce winners out of losers, in the sense that candidates who in some instances place second or third out of first ballot rankings end up winning. Further, Mr. Speaker, first past the post is efficient and transparent. It tends to produce decisive results. Canadians learn, more or less on election night, what kind of government they're going to get. That is in contrast to many European countries where governments are formed weeks, sometimes months after an election night. That is not efficient, that isn't transparent, and I would submit it isn't democratic. And first past the post ensures accountability. It is heavy on accountability. When Canadians decide that it is time for a change, time to change a government, first past the post tends to produce such an outcome. And it provides accountability by connecting members of Parliament with their electors, their constituents. That is in contrast to other electoral systems where, for example, members are elected based on being on a party list. And so, Mr. Speaker, those are just some of the many reasons why first past the post system is a system that has worked. I would submit that it isn't by accident that Canada is one of the most stable and strongest democracies in the world. I don't think it is an accident that we have seen for more than 150 years the peaceful transfer of power. Very simply, Mr. Speaker, if the system isn't broken, then there is no need to fix it.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for La Prairie. Thank you. I'm very happy to speak to this motion M86 today. We've been talking about electoral reform for a long time. Many governments and political parties have committed to electoral reform, to reforming our electoral system in a number of ways. Or some have said before being elected to government said, we will discuss, we will work towards reform, but for reasons that are beyond us, that never occurred. So many parties, historically, when they were elected to form government, they dropped this promise of electoral reform. And they dropped other promises, by the way. Now, this motion is a unique and original way. It proposes another route rather than the other route that didn't work. Clearly, it didn't work because here we are in the same situation. So this motion would create a citizens' assembly, and they would study the matter and then propose electoral reform. So this would be a very democratic process in which citizens would come together and then suggest solutions for electoral reform. Now, there are some interesting aspects of the motion that I would like to address. First, the motion mentions that election results do not reflect voters' true wishes. We have elections in Canada and in the provinces and in Quebec, and in our elections, parties can be elected with a majority even though they were not voted for by a majority of citizens. So some people in a given riding or district will say, well, we didn't vote for that person. We didn't vote for them with an overwhelming majority, and yet they have a majority and they have now power and authority. Now, the motion also mentions that voter turnout is at an all-time low. We talked about Chinese interference in our elections, and the Liberal Party and other parties concluded that citizen participation is very important, but China's interference, in fact, decreased voter trust in the voting system. And the Bloc feels that we need to get rid of Chinese interference. We need to get rid of this sword of Damocles hanging above our heads so that Canadians can truly have trust and confidence in their electoral system. We need to increase voters' trust in the system, and that's how we can increase voter turnout. Now, there's another aspect of this motion. The motion says that citizens' assemblies are independent, that they're non-partisan, and that they are representative. So the motion touts the benefits of citizens' assemblies. It mentions that citizens' assemblies will be, in a sense, inclusive. Then the motion mentions the method of voting. So a citizens' assembly would study electoral reform and then propose solutions. That's an important aspect. These members of the citizens' assembly will make suggestions, proposals. Here's how we feel. We feel that the motion is interesting and positive. So I would like to inform you that the Bloc Québécois will be voting in favor of this motion. Now, I would like to say that I heard my Conservative colleagues speak, and we do need to express ourselves, no matter what our opinions are, because we are elected democratically, we represent our citizens, and not everyone supports electoral reform. I heard my Conservative colleague speak, and he said that this would require a referendum, that electoral reform would require a referendum so that everyone could participate and express themselves in favor or against. But the colleague also said, the Conservative colleague, he said that the process would be very simple. Yes, it would be simple, but simple doesn't mean it's the best solution. So, as I said, the Bloc Québécois agrees with the motion. The Bloc feels that this process, the advantage of this process is that it takes the process out of the hands of politicians because, as I said at the beginning of my speech, it's never worked when politicians are in charge of this. So this places the reflection and the study in the hands of citizens, those who we represent and those who we want to be well represented by our electoral system. So a citizens' assembly would study possible changes to the electoral process. Now, the motion mentions diversity, which is positive, of course, but there's something missing. There's something missing in the motion. Now, there are all sorts of factors mentioned in the motions that need to be considered, but nowhere in the motion is it mentioned that Quebec needs to be represented in a way that matches its demographic weight. So we call on our colleagues to make sure that Quebec is properly represented in a way that matches its demographic weight. Now, elections are the cornerstone of democracy. So this matter is incredibly important. Now, there is no perfect electoral system. It doesn't exist. In France, for instance, their system is completely different from ours, but satisfaction is not necessarily higher among citizens. The system in France is criticized left, right, and center. So what's the solution then if there is no perfect election system? What's important is that political parties, when they take office, they totally do a 180. Now, I'd like to read to you what was said in the speech from the throne. When the government was elected in 2015, they said the government will lead consultations on electoral reform to ensure that 2015 will have been the last election under first past the post. That was said in the speech from the throne. And this just goes to show that you can't trust any political party, other than the Bloc Québécois maybe, but we will never form government in this parliament. So it's hard to trust political parties, and we can't leave electoral reform up to political parties. So after this speech from the throne, a committee was struck. They met 57 times. They had about 200 witnesses, several participants, and what that led to was nothing at all. So that led to an impasse. What of electoral reform? Well, the solution in this motion might be a great avenue. The Bloc Québécois, though, would like to mention that this citizens' assembly can't be done willy-nilly. There does need to be a referendum. We agree with the Conservative colleague on that.
Okay, so Alain Thériault, I would pronounce it differently, but I'll give it a French accent. He's an outstanding MP. Sometimes I find the Bloc highly frustrating because Quebec is in my Canada. And they have very good MPs on this round and other rounds, actually. It sometimes frustrates me, but not anymore. Now I realize, like, especially under their new leader or their leader they have now, he's basically said, hey, separation's off the table, but Quebec issues, which is, a large portion of the country, French Canadian issues, are our focus. So, and then, of course, they goes on to other issues. So they don't frustrate me as they used to when they were talking separation, right? The only reason the separation would suck is because they're like, it's not like they're on the end. They're kind of in the middle. So it really would make a bit of a mess of things. But if they vote it, it's a vote, whatever. I believe in democracy. Like it or hate it. Okay, so we are going to go to the industry. Indu. Oh, I don't want to see that one. Here we go. It's a Native American. Sun. Now, correct me on that if I'm totally wrong. Over top, of course. The Industry Committee, Indu, has been discussing, I'm putting it up here, basically the Digital Charter Implementation Act, Bill C-27, and we have there's a lot of witnesses on this one. Research chair in IA Law and Data Governance with McGill University, Ignacio Cofoni, Catherine Regis, a full professor at University de Montreal, Canada Institute for Advanced Research, Elisa Strom, Pan Canada AI Strategy. So these people have real, and then MILA, Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute, Yashua Bengio. Sounds like a song. Scientific director. So, they have a very good lineup of people who know what the heck they're talking about.
So that brings us to.
So, and one of the MPs that I like, MP Lightsaber. He's chairing this, and he does a pretty good job. He's a Liberal MP, but he's fairly fair. I don't think this one's going to be, as hard-hitting as the other ones were. I'm just trying to skip ahead to past their statements because they're quite a bit. Yeah, so MP Lightbound is the chair, and like I said, he does a pretty good job.
Yeah, we might get, and I trust that we're in good hands with Clerk Burke to figure it all out. So okay. That brings us to the end of the meeting. So I know, Mr. Perkins, you had some notice of motions. Are you okay to bring them up perhaps at a later point? Because we've reached the 2 hours.
Something happened there.
Way over time. Mr. Turnbull.
Okay. I'm just on it now, sorry. There. Okay. Sorry, it's just taking a minute longer than I thought here. We have MP Perkins. He comes up first. Does a pretty, explanatory job. Okay.
This important discussion.
Thank you very much. And now to start our conversation, I'll yield the floor to MP Perkins for 6 minutes.
All right.
Thank you, witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The continuation of this very important piece of legislation and some very interesting opening testimony. Originally, this bill proposed only legislating and regulating what it called high-impact systems, which was not defined in the law, but would be defined in some future date in regulation. Mr. Benjo, perhaps, is it Mr. or Dr. Benjo?
Either way is fine.
Okay, Dr. Benjo. We now have two added definitions in the draft amendment the minister has made to the bill, where it added a definition in a schedule of high impact, but also added a category, specifically machine learning, and a third being general purpose. Is general purpose getting too broad in terms of the power? It strikes me that large amounts of AI that will happen in businesses, business process, not attached to individual, the internet or that kind of thing. It's about, there's a company in my riding that's using it for, or trying to train it in order to identify the difference between a scallop and a surf clam. To me, that's not something that is high impact. It may be on their business, but in the end of the day, it's just a business efficiency, but it has and will have a general purpose, if I'm reading it right, application. So does the bill go too far with the general purpose provision?
No, I think it's very important to cover the general purpose AI systems, because they're also the ones that could be the most dangerous if misused in particular. And this is the place where there's also the most uncertainty about the harms that could follow from these systems. Now, I think by having a law that says something where more oversight is necessary for these general purpose systems will also be an encouragement for the developers to create more specialized systems. In fact, in most applications in business and science or medicine, we actually want a system that's very specialized. There's one particular kind of question we care about. And until recently, these were the only kinds of AI systems, of course, that were known how to build. But the general purpose systems like the large language models can be specialized, can be turned into something specific that doesn't know everything about the world, but only some specific question, in which case they become much more innocuous.
Thank you. Mr. Kofioni? I've got a question around your discussion about groups and larger harms. We've had some witnesses way back at the beginning of this bill from Jim Balsillie on talk about the fact that the bill is absent in dealing with both on privacy and on artificial intelligence group harms and group risks. I wonder if you could expand that a little more. And what would you see needed to be added? You mentioned Section 5.1 of ADA. Can you share with us a little more what you had in mind?
Of course, yeah. The Directive on Automated Decision-Making explicitly recognizes that harms can be done to individuals or communities. But ADA, when it defines harm in 5.1, it has repeated references to individuals for property, economic, physical, and psychological harm. The thing is that AI harms, by their nature, are often diffuse. So oftentimes, they are to groups and not to individuals. For a good example of this, think of AI bias, which is covered in 5.2, not in 5.1. But if you have an automated system that allocates, for example, employment, and it is biased, it is very difficult to know whether a particular individual got or didn't get the job because of that bias or not. But it's easier to see that the system may be biased towards a certain group. The same goes for representation issues in AI, where an individual would have difficulties in proving harm under the Act, but the harm is very real for a particular group. The same is true of misinformation. And the same is true of some types of systemic discrimination that may not be captured by the current definition of bias in the Act. So what I would find concerning is that by regulating a technology that is more likely to have effects on groups than on individuals, under a harm definition that specifically targets individuals, we may be leaving out most of what we want to cover.
I very much look forward to getting your draft amendment on that and taking a look at it. Thank you.
Okay, so that guy gave a pretty good explanation, but Hall, who is that? Yeah, I know here. Has been asking about, okay, what is this about? Okay, so it's about C-27, and C-27 is being brought forward. So what they're doing is now they're researching. They brought the bill, it's kind of going voted on. Now they're at the committee. Now they're looking, asking, all the parties get to ask questions from experts about, this bill, so they can see how they will vote on it or add amendments as such. So that's what the committees basically do. And one of the things they do, they look at bills and another, all kinds of other things. But this is what they're doing here. So this is the summary of Bill C-27. Part 1 enacts the Consumer Privacy Protection Act to govern the protection of personal information of individuals while taking into account the need of organizations to collect, use, or disclose personal information in the course of commercial activities. In consequence, it repeals Part 1 of the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act and changes the short title to the Act of the Electronic Documents Act. It also makes consequential and related amendments to other acts. So it does a lot of things you can't say in the summary because there's so much. So Part 2 of this summary enacts the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, which establishes an administrative tribunal to hear appeals to certain decisions made by the Privacy Commissioner under the Consumer Privacy Protection Act and to impose penalties for the contravention of certain provisions of that act. It also makes a related amendment to the Administrative Tribunal Support Service of Canada Act. So there it says, there's some teeth to it, imposing possibly, they can impose penalties, and the tribunal to hear appeals and certain decisions made by the Privacy Commissioner. So that it gives it real, it's an institution really. And then Part 3 enacts the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act to regulate international and interprovincial trade and commercial in artificial intelligence systems by requiring that certain persons adopt measures to mitigate risks of harm and biased output, which he was just talking about, that witness, related to high-impact artificial intelligence systems. The Act provides for public reporting and authorizes the minister to order the production of records related to artificial intelligence systems. The Act also establishes prohibitions related to the possession or use of illegally obtained personal information for the purpose of designing, developing, using, or making available the use of artificial intelligence systems, and to the making available for use of artificial intelligence systems in its use causes serious harm to individuals. So this is the Taylor Swift section, I'll call it, the Swiftie section. Section 3 is if the AIs, when they're stealing or they're taking your image, your like, and all that to make nefarious things against you. So I believe by the summary, remember, they always say the devil's in the details. So the devil is in this details. It's a very long bill. There is 130 plus 160 chapters in Part 1. The index, just looking at the index, is pages and pages. So it's a very long and full in-depth bill. As you can see, these 3 parts are very, very they're big, the large scope, and this is what it is. And so, let's listen to the next questionnaire on this.
I'd like to ask this perhaps of all the witnesses, maybe starting with Ms. Strom. We've had a great debate about whether or not, as Dr. Benjo said, having an imperfect bill is better than not having a bill. The challenge for parliamentarians is in two aspects of that. One, I never like passing an imperfect bill, especially one as important to this. I don't think there's any merit in sort of saying we're number one, we got our first bill through. But the way Parliament works, it's 5 to 10 years before legislation comes back. I also don't like giving the department a blank check to basically not have to come back to Parliament on an overall public policy framework of how we're going to govern this. And this bill lacks that. It just talks about the specifics about high impact general purpose and machine learning, but it doesn't talk overall about saying, like the Canada Health Act has 5 principles, right? So what are the 5 principles of AI? Transparency, that kind of thing. The bill doesn't speak to that governs all AI, and I think that's an issue going forward. I also think it's an issue to give the bureaucracy, while maintaining flexibility, total control over future development without having.
Yeah, Johnny Matrix. Right now you're right. You can spot AI generated crap when it's full AI. See, this is what happened. I was like, looked at this as like, why can't you bring certain video into court? Well, what's been happening like a long time now? We're talking 20 years. They were able to change video that you can't tell the difference. They can't change the whole thing, and this is where John Matrix is totally right. If you were to change the whole video, you'll spot it. At least there'll be experts, like probably John Matrix here, that can spot that stuff. And then there's apps that could spot it. But what was happening before it was done by people, right, by applications and programs, that they could change certain parts of a video, not the whole thing, but certain sections that make it almost undetectable. Now the problem is with AI is going to be able to change certain parts of the video that'll make it undetectable. So 90% of the video or 95% of the video is real, and that 1%, and we won't be able to detect it. Now they're saying the only way to stop this, and they're already there. They're trying to get this, but this is at a high level. This won't happen to the low pleb, like the guy in the guy that's getting picked on in university or college, right? But the AI, they're creating AI like the U.S. military to be able to decipher any tampering with video, and it takes AI because the amount. It's basically you have to have a doctorate degree to detect this in video. So changing just a little bit of thing, that's been so long, with 20 years. But now AI, we're going to do it. So once you got AI, you got a supercomputer. You have 50 people under you. So you got 50 doctors under you that can be producing fake video after fake video, and it only needs to change a little bit. Now, AI needs to have a nefarious, brilliant mind behind it to do it. It won't be able to drive that idea on its own, but it'll be able to do the functions. So that's really where we're at with this video. It's just and that's why they're saying it's about to hit us so hard. Right now, we're having all these videos are 100% AI generated, and that's not what's going to happen. And they're saying during these elections that are coming up, like they're thinking like sometime during this election, there's going to be just tweaked a little bit. And what happens in our brain, once you see something, you can't unsee it. Even though you know it was fake, it kind of can stick. And that's where the problem is. It's just like when they used to do the old time thing, when they used to put a skull and bones on subliminal messaging on horror films. It worked. It doesn't matter that you know it's fake. You know it, or you know it's there. It doesn't matter. You have a subconscious part of your brain that eats that up. It can't close its eyes. So it sees it, and it's aware there of it. So that's why this is such a big scare with a lot of people. It's because there's a lot of people that are basically going to be unprotected, thinking, "Hey, I can see this, I can do it," and they'll be hit subliminally, and that's the big problem. Now, hey, it's not a problem if both sides are using it equally, screwing with our heads equally, but the worry is it's going to be happening from the triad against us right now. And we'll see it. Taylor Swift it seems like that is the initial. They've tried it. They did the first big push. It's this Taylor Swift thing, which I never seen the video, to see how real. But there's going to be a lot. Okay, let's listen. What do you got here? Look at Simil. It says, look at the bigger picture. Rick Velecki. People aren't stupid. It's often they are new to the info. Oh, yeah, that's it. It's new. You're right. You're 100% right there, really. You get hit with it, and they're saying we're going to get hit with it. I mean, like the American population is going to get hit with this new reality that there's really these videos are going to look exactly like they should. And we're going to get bombarded with it really quickly. So within a 2-month period, it'll be the learning curve will be over. But it doesn't matter when it's elections. If that learning curve is during the election, that could affect the election. And that's what the big deal is about. It's about affecting it. And it's so hard to get it. Getting stupider by the day. It says, fuck all. John Matrix, they can keep their progress. This is what gives it. Oh, did I? Oh, I didn't. Well, yeah. I believe AI is going to create a lot of problems. But the biggest, what is the Canadian government motto? I want to know where I am 19. AI is going to alleviate a lot of work for doctors. So a lot of people walking around with a little bit of issues here and there. Our medical, I believe, in the Western world, is going to go leaps and bounds. You're going to actually get real doctor advice a lot more frequently because the doctor can have the AI do the research and then it just the doctor, he or she verifies it. Is easier. So they just have to verify what a AI doctorate has already done. So I believe that this is going to be our biggest shift is medical, because it takes 8 years to get someone to do any medical research. So you can build 1,000, 100,000 a day, right? So it'll expand the amount of doctorates we have. Very, very quickly.
Having to seek Parliament.
Once
but
we
I'd
get
like
there,
to ask all of the witnesses about the 5 things or 4 things or 3 things that are sort of high-level philosophies about how we should govern AI in Canada, which this bill does not seem to define. Starting with Ms. Strom and then go from there.
Thank you for the question. So just to make sure I understand correctly, you're asking for us to zero in on areas that the bill doesn't currently address?
No, sort of a high-level idea of, all AI when a user is interacting with it needs to be transparent. So what would similar types of philosophies, forgetting about whether it's high-impact machine learning or general purpose, that should govern all of this in the Act, which the bill is missing?
Absolutely. So under principles of safe and trustworthy AI, there's a broad international consensus about what constitutes safe and trustworthy AI, whether you look at the OECD principles or you look at the Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI. Many organizations have a common consensus about what constitutes that. These are principles such as fairness as a primary concern, ensuring that AI is delivering recommendations that treat people fairly and equitably, and that there's no discrimination and no bias. Accountability, ensuring that AI systems and developers of AI systems are accountable for the impacts of the technologies that they're developing. Transparency is one that you mentioned, and that is ensuring that we understand and we have the opportunity to interrogate AI systems and models and get a better understanding of how they are coming towards the decisions, the recommendations that they are developing. Privacy is one that is very deeply interconnected with the bill that's before you today, and those are questions that are deeply intertwined with AI as well, too, ensuring that fundamental principles and rights of privacy are also protected.
Thank you very much, Madam Strom, and Mr. Perkins. Hopefully another MP will pick up where you left off, but we're way over time. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. It seems like we have some really important testimony, so thank you for making the time, and thank you for lending your expertise to this important conversation. I think we've all heard the phrase or the kind of cliche that says perfection can be the enemy of the good. I wonder if this is one of those instances where we have a very fast evolving AI space and lots of expertise here in Canada. But then we have people with differing opinions. Some people say, oh, we should split the bill up and do the ADA portion over again. We have others saying that, well, no, we need to move forward. I think in a lot of the opening testimony that I heard from yourselves today is that speed is of the essence. Mr. Bengio, maybe you can comment on whether you think that we should start over with ADA and maybe comment on the importance of moving quickly.
Yes. I mentioned urgency many times in my little presentation because you have to understand AI not as a static thing where we are now, but the trajectory that research and development happening mostly in large companies, but also in academia, is moving towards. And as these systems become smarter, more powerful in their cognitive abilities, they are dual use. And that means more good and more harm can happen. And so, well, the harm part is what we need government to protect us from. And in particular, going back to the question from Perkins, we need to make sure that one of the principles is that major harm, like, for example, national security threats, will not be, coming easily from the products that are considered legal under this law. And this is why the high impact category and maybe the different ways that it could be spelled out is so important.
Thank you. And maybe I'll stick with you, Mr. Bengio, for the moment, but I wanted to also ask you, what are the risks to Canadians if AI is not regulated sooner rather than later? I mean, you mentioned the idea that there's more good and more harm that can be done, but in the absence of any regulation and any law, what are the potential harms as you see it?
So maybe the shortest term concern that was a priority, for example, for the experts consulted by the World Economic Forum just a few weeks ago, is disinformation. The use of AI, for example, currently with deepfakes, to imitate images of people, their voices, their rendering, in movement, in video, and interacting with people through texts, through dialogue in a way that can fool a social media user and make them change their mind on political questions. So there's real concern about the use of AI in kind of politically oriented ways that go against the principles of our democracy. So that's a short-term thing. The other, I would say, like next, maybe, go one more year or two later, is the threats in terms of the use of AI of these advanced AI systems for cyber attacks. So the ability of these systems to, in terms of programming, has been making a lot of rapid progress in recent years, and it's expected to continue even faster than any other ability because we can generate an infinite amount of data for that, just like playing the game of Go. And when these systems, get strong enough to defeat our current cyber defenses and our industrial, digital infrastructure, we are in trouble because, especially if these systems fall in the wrong hands, we need to secure those systems. One of the things that the Biden executive order insisted on is that these large systems need to be secured to minimize those risks. And then there are other risks that people talk about, like helping bad actors to develop new weapons or simply have the expertise that they wouldn't have otherwise. So all of these things need a law as quickly as possible to make sure that we minimize those risks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I also just wanted to mention, and I know that you're aware as a signatory that our government developed a voluntary code of conduct for advanced generative artificial intelligence systems. I wanted to ask how ADA builds on that voluntary code. Do you see the two as complementary, and that the voluntary code precedes the bill, and that the bill would actually really add on to that and further this sort of mission of ensuring that we have a regulatory environment that provides some certainty? Could you speak to that, Mr. Bengio?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. You're exactly right. Voluntary codes are useful to get off the ground quickly, but it is not guaranteed that companies will follow that code. Also, the voluntary code we have is very vague. We need to be, having more precisions about criteria for, what is acceptable and what not. And even companies, I think, need to have that. We've seen that companies, even some companies, have declared publicly in the U.S. that they wouldn't follow the Biden voluntary code. So I think we have no choice. We have to make sure that there's a level playing field. Otherwise, what we're doing is we are favoring the corporations that don't go by the voluntary code, because for them it means less expenses with the public. So yeah, we really need to have regulation and not just voluntary codes.
Thank you. I think I got that last part. You got a little choppy. Is my time up, Chair? Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. I want to begin with you, Mr. Bengio. You talked about imminent risks for democracy, misinformation, deep fakes that circulate more and more. Today you're a witness before this committee remotely. In the framework we have now, what guarantees that you're actually with us? Good question. Well, it's to avoid precisely this kind of thing that we need rules. For instance, we need computer platforms like Zoom and other social media platforms to clearly indicate whether content, video, audio, text is generated by computers or artificial intelligence, or if it's something coming from a recording or other. This is why we need legislation. It's to protect the public, as well as incentives for businesses that have developed the technology to better be able to separate what is real and fake. Recently, we had instances of fraud. Grandpa, grandma, were victims of fraud because of AI created voices. Now, are you saying that in the current regulatory framework, businesses have no incentives to identify the fact that it is fake? And my question is, in Bill C-27, as it lies before us, do we have what is needed, or are improvements needed in this regard? I do believe there are. Catherine may be better at answering this question. Well, if I've understood the question, in the most recent amendments, there is a concern about identifying information produced by AI as such for the public. I do think it's an important aspect. You have to avoid that people are confused and develop a complete lack of confidence out there in society. So yes, we do have to work on that legislative angle. Thank you. You talked about provisions that could be applied immediately. You talked about urgency, Professor Bengio. something that might resemble a registry that would be tabled with the government. A security analysis, essentially. Are you telling us that we should do what we do with medications? And before a medication be on the market, you have to weigh the balances of the good, the bad, the harm. So, I mean, do you think that these AI situations merit this kind of registry? Yes. And we do that in many sectors of society, not just drugs. We do it with railways, transportation, even food, meat processing. It's all aimed at protecting the public. So businesses have to demonstrate that their product is not going to be harmful. And to date, all things to do with informatics, computers have avoided this, but AI can transform society, and it can be good, it can be bad, and that is why we need framework. There is a willingness on the part of industry, and maybe Professor Regis, Professor Benjo, the question is for both of you. Sometimes we're told, well, industry could self-regulate. This voluntary approach could work. I tend to have little confidence in that type of approach. What do you think of industry's ability to self-regulate? And I might suggest, as the beginning of an answer, with this regulation. I mean, we didn't think of a clandestine passenger who might benefit from others self-regulating for this, bad actor not to self-regulate. What do you think of this? Well, I think it could be a very good intermediary step. It could be put in place very quickly, and businesses can consult amongst themselves. That's the positive side. But then there might be bad players. There might be an incentive to cut the corners if we don't have, equal rules for everybody and mandatory rules. Professor Regis, is Canada a big enough player? Canadians think we are an important G7 country, but actually we're a very small economy. Do we have enough clout to influence? Well, there's the issue of influence, but I would like to come back to the issue of self-regulation, which I do believe is important. Clearly, I'd say it is not sufficient. And I think there is a strong consensus on that on an international scale. It is not enough to have self-regulation. Legislative frameworks have a role. You need accountability. You need businesses to have accountability frameworks. And the legislation we're talking about today is part of numerous tools for trustworthy AI. It's not the only solution. Legislation is important. Law is important. You need ethic rules. You also, defensive rules. You talk about international standards, international business. It's a comprehensive strategy that's necessary. So that's for the first part of my answer. What was the second part of your question? Could you please remind me? Your second question is, can Canada significantly influence given the size of its economy and its role in AI? Well, Canada is not the United States when it comes to clout or the development of AI, but it is an important player for a number of reasons. In the research field, Canada is very strong and it's recognized. Canada has participated in numerous initiatives, including the World Partnership on AI. Canada is an important actor. It needs to position itself. However, we don't want Canada to lose ground. It needs to be consistent with its vision, its values, and adopt very clear measures at a Canada-wide scale. Thank you very much, Professor. Mr. Massey, the floor is yours.
And thanks to our witnesses. A couple of things that worked in the past in this committee, I think kind of come to light, kind of where we're at right now, and it relates to a little bit to the voluntary code. One of the first things was it used to be legal in Canada for businesses to write off fines and penalties on the environment or anti-consumer court cases where they'd actually get tax deductible of the fines and penalties of up to 50% off. There were drug companies for misleading, environmental companies for doing the wrong thing, and environmental companies, environmental damage that was done. And so it led to this imbalance where it was actually an incentive, our business-related expense, to actually go ahead with bad practices that affected people and also our environment because it actually paid off for them. And then it kind of created imbalance for innovation and so forth. The other one is my work on right to repair, which passed through this committee and it was in the Senate. We ended up taking a voluntary agreement as the auto sector. And so we basically said we got a field goal instead of a touchdown. And we now have this as emerged again as an issue because some of the industry will follow the voluntary agreement and some don't. Some wouldn't even sign on to the voluntary agreement, including Tesla, until recent. But there still is major issues, and now they're back to lobbying here on the Hill, especially because what we did know as a vulnerability 10 years ago when we started this was that when it worked in towards the electronics and the sharing of information and data, it changed things again, and there wasn't anything there. So I guess my question is this, to Ms. Strom as a start, and Ms. Regis and Mr. Benjo, have we also, like right now with the voluntary agreement, created the potential system right now where good actors will come to the table and follow a voluntary agreement, and bad actors might actually use it as an opportunity to excel their business plans, to knock out competition? I've seen that happen between those two examples that we've had there. So maybe we'll start with Ms. Strom, because you haven't been on just yet, and then Ms. Regis, and then Mr. Bengio. If we could go in that order, please. Ms. Strom.
Thank you very much for the question. I actually think that the voluntary code is an important and critical first step towards regulating this sector. And I think it was a way to move things forward and also to open the conversation and the discourse about the need for responsible AI practices, methodologies, and approaches as we innovate in this sector. And so I think it was a very, very important first step, but it can't be the last step. As you identify and others have recognized, voluntary codes of conduct, voluntary regulations are just that. They're voluntary. And so we need much firmer and clear rules, regulations, and guidelines about what our expectations are about how the technology is developed and deployed, how it's monitored, how it's assessed for its impact, and understanding what those impacts might be.
Thank you. Ms. Regis?
Yes, I think it goes back to my previous point, and Elisa is very clear on that, and I agree. It clearly is not enough, and there is a way to really avoid having to comply with these voluntary norms. So, but I'm a law professor, so for me, it makes sense for sure to have a binding regulation in that space, especially since there's a lot of power dynamics and economical interests at stake. And I would say that with the proposed bill, one thing that is very important and I like about is that it focuses on ex ante measures. So, because we've been talking about what if something happens, and the Canadian will suffer the consequences if something happens. So let's not wait for too many of these consequences and really focus on forcing people to have ex ante measure to make sure that before anything important is launched on the market, they do their due diligence and we have access to that. It's transparent. We have some accountability mechanisms to make sure that these prejudices are avoided, and we force that.
Thank you. Mr. Bengio? Dr. Bengio?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything my colleagues said. I'll just add this notion of creating a level playing field. So if you have corporations that really want to do good, if there is no mandatory regulation, then they're forced to do as bad as the worst guy in the class, right? What you want is the opposite. You want best in class. But without regulation, we get in the worst in class scenario where the organizations that are less responsible end up winning.
I'm going to go to Mr. Cofone, but I guess, the trouble we're in right now is we have this voluntary code out there already. So the actions and deliberations of companies are making decisions right now, and some in one direction, some in another, until they're brought into regulatory power. So I think the ship has sailed to some degree in terms of where this can go. And so we're left with this bill and all the warts that it has in a number of different issues. And one of the things that, it's a challenge. And Mr. Cofone, maybe you can highlight a little bit of this with your governance background. Perhaps I met with ACTRA. This is the Actors Guild, and a lot of their concerns have to be dealt with through the Copyright Act on this. And if we don't deal with it, though, on this bill somehow, then we actually leave a gaping hole for not only just abuse of the actors that include children and their state of welfare, but we also leave a blind spot for how the public can be manipulated and so forth, and everything from consumer society to politics to a whole slew of things. So what do we do? Do you have any suggestions? Like how do we kind of fix those components that we're not even? It's a separate act.
Yes, if I quickly can add something to your prior question besides agreement with the prior three responses, is that environment, like you brought up, is a great example. Because in environmental law, years ago, we thought that regulating it was challenging because we mistakenly thought that the costs were local but the harms were global. So not regulating meant developing the industry while not imposing global harms. And with AI, it's the same. We think sometimes that the harms are global and the cost of regulating are local, but that is not the case. Many of the harms of AI are local, and that makes it urgent for Canada to pass a regulation such as this one that protects its citizens while it fosters industry. On the Copyright Act, it's a challenging question because, as Professor Benjo pointed to a bit earlier, AI is not just one technology. Technologies do one thing. Self-driving cars drive, cameras film, but AI is a family of methods that can do anything. So regulating AI is not about changing one variable or the other. AI would eventually change or affect all of the law, and we will have to reform several statutes. What is being discussed today is an accountability framework plus a privacy law, because that's the one that's most intimately affected by AI. I do not think that we should be illusioned by the fact that changing this will account for all AI and for all the effects of AI, or to think that we should stop it because it doesn't capture everything, because it cannot. I think it is worth discussing the accountability framework to account for harm and bias. It is worth discussing the privacy change to account for AI, and possibly it is also warranted to do a change in the Copyright Act to account for generative AI and the new challenges that it brings for copyright.
Any time left, Mr. Chair?
You can go ahead, Brian.
Okay, just real quickly, maybe I could get just a yes or no, good idea, bad idea, maybe the long term, really quick. If eventually we got to a joint House and Senate committee that overlooked AI on a regular basis, similar to like a defense thing, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? So it then would cover all those bases of other jurisdictions than just industry committee, where if we had both houses that would meet and oversee artificial intelligence in the future. Maybe just, I know it's a hard one, yes or no, but I don't have much time, and if we could go with in reverse order. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Regis?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Benjo?
I can't answer. I'm not enough of a legal scholar.
That's fine. That's okay. Fair enough. It's just an idea. And Ms. Strum?
I do think that would be helpful.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you very much, Mr. Généreux. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses. Such an interesting discussion today. And for all witnesses, no one in particular. But let's say we have someone who is ill-intentioned, a hacker, a terrorist, a thief. And I think this is one of Mr. Benjo's concerns. This person might use AI for bad purposes. And if you if we were to pass this law tomorrow morning, what would prevent all of these terrorist organization or bad actors from doing what they do? And following up on the question of my colleague in the block, even a recorded message, used to trick someone, the hacker's not going to say, this is an AI-produced message. So do you think that the bill that is before us might change things? I mean, will it really protect the Canadian and Quebec public when it comes to AI? That's my first question. Yes. Yes. What it will do, for instance, is if there are AI systems that are developed by Canadian businesses that are legitimate, the legislation will obligate them to avoid those systems, to prevent that the systems fall in the hands of criminals. Of course, it won't prevent the criminals to use a system developed elsewhere, but that's why we need to work on international treaties. And we have to minimize those risks. So what the Americans are requiring of companies today includes that. So if we were just to align ourselves with the United States in that regard, to avoid that very powerful systems don't fall in bad players' hands, we should at least be providing the same protections and working internationally to broaden that. Also, the fact of sending a signal, we want to so that users can distinguish what is AI or not. That will be incentives for business to find technical solutions. I think it's the businesses that manufacture content like, photos or audio content need to be able to encrypt, have a signature to ensure that this is real. But for businesses to move in that direction, there needs to be legislation to push them in that direction as much as possible. The regulation we have before us, or the bill we have before us, will it enable us to be sufficiently efficient, as good as what the U.S. has put in place? And subsequent to the U.S. Decree, will the U.S. be going even further than what's in the executive order? And what about compared to the EU? Because they've moved faster than us. So what our current bill we have, and the bill, well, actually, I'm not sure it's been adopted yet in Europe. I'm going to let my colleagues answer those questions, but I will say is something I have proposed is that there be a criterion that is the same as that in the US as to the size of this distance, the ability to calculate. That would mean that systems that are above that threshold now would have to be registered in a registry. That would put everyone at the things at the same surveillance level as in the U.S. and it's not in the bill. So we need a starting point, but then we do need to continue to regulate in keeping with scientific advances and based on criteria that what is a high impact system. But right away we can start with the same thing. I mean, in Europe they have a similar system. It's a consensus. It's a simple requirement that we can use to distinguish systems. There are a big majority that are not of systems not a threat to national security, but there's some that are, and they are in the high impact. And Madame Regis, for Europe, a few points. There was a question: is the bill sufficient? Certainly the bill will help, but no, it's not sufficient because there are other legislative levels, provinces, for instance. Right now, Quebec has I report the Quebec government has, mandated a body to work on regulation. So we have to do more to solidify the guarantees that will protect us. As to the United States, it's difficult to know what direction they're going to move in formally for next steps, but the Biden executive order was a signal. Very few people expected that. It's an excellent initiative. Now, concerning there was an aspect of interoperability in your question. So I think, yes, that is important. How is Canada going to align itself with the European Union, the United States, and so forth? And to talk about Europe, the more finalized version of the text, 300 pages, just came out last week. So I have managed to master all the details, but we have to know how all of this will align. One question I have is European legislation is more focused on the high risk. In our case, we talk more about incidents. So how can the two align? And that is a question we have to give more thought to. Thank you. Ms. Regis, could you ask, Judge Petit to analyze that 300-page report for you? I just would like to add one thing, a small thing. The fact of having a bill based on principles protects us against forthcoming changes. We give the possibility to the legislature to adapt important aspects and harmonize regulation with our partners. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Mr. Van Biden, your floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've had a number of witnesses before us in a very wide range of perspectives, some that have told us to rip up the bill and start all over again, and at the same time, we've also heard that the genie is out of the bottle, and it's almost operating like a Wild West out there. My question is to Ms. Strom. In November 2023, CAFAR published a regulatory transformation in the age of AI, and according to the summary, this report cautions the current efforts to regulate AI are doomed if they fail to ignore a crucial aspect of the transformative impact of AI on the regulatory processes themselves. Can you go over the findings of this report in a little more detail?
Oh, this is an interesting question.
Thank you for the question. I'll give it a shot for you. So that report was actually authored by Professor Gillian Hadfield, who's the director of the Schwartz-Treisman Institute at the University of Toronto. She's a Canada CFAR AI chair, and I believe she was a witness at this committee last week or the week before. And so, as you understand, Professor Hadfield is an expert in regulation and particularly has developed significant expertise in understanding AI regulation in Canada and internationally. The policy brief that we published at CFAR was really ideas that came out of, ideas from Professor Hadfield and her laboratory, her research associates and her colleagues, really looking directly at, the need to be more innovative as we think about regulating AI. This is a technology that's moving very quickly. It's a technology with so many dimensions that we haven't explored previously in other regulated sectors. And so I believe that the points that Professor Hadfield and her colleagues were making was that they, as we think about regulating AI, we also need to be incredibly flexible, dynamic, and responsive to the technology as it moves forward.
All right, so she's basically, hey, there are potential. Basically, what that report was saying is that there's potential, huge backlash potential for regulating this in the improper way. He's basically, or she, Hatfield, I was thinking of Metallica, is basically saying, we have to be cautious about this regulation. And one thing is, another person said, a geopolitical individual, we may be restricting it But China's won't be, and other countries, they won't be restricting it on most of their citizens or some of their citizens. So it's not that, test theories and stuff like that should also be, a part of it, or else we're going to lose the AI game, is the argument that many are making. And, okay, so I'm going to sign off. But I think AI personally, I think we need to really look into it and do a very quick all hands on deck from all people involved in it to make sure that it's going in the right direction. It's going to be, I believe, the new. Basically, we're making a new human, a new. I don't want to use that R word, but it's like a new being we're creating. Before we've made tools. But this AI, and we're not there yet for most people's use, but we're about to get to the AI that's going to be at the level of a being. It'll be as powerful of a being, can do as much damage or hate as an elephant can, It's going to be a very big deal. So, you're going to have all hands on deck, and what'll happen is if we don't start regulating or looking into the regulations now, what'll happen is we'll run into a problem, and then we'll do what a lot of politicians like to do, knee-jerk reaction. So the one who was already against it will be like, see, shut it all down. And then, you don't necessarily get good legislation when you get the knee-jerk reaction. Combining evils, the last thing we need is a government-controlled AI. Yeah. It's his last thing, yeah. And on the one thing I know, I'd like to see does anyone know, I gotta pause this, but does anyone know what's going on with this Ring of Fire road? I haven't heard anything in the news. There's billions of dollars. There's American Air Force is putting money into this thing. Like, do we have to bring in the American engineers, 100% beef? To do this. This is how we got the road up to the Yukon. It was actually going to Alaska, but the road to Yukon, it was made by the American engineers, 100%, 110% beef. But unless there's something going on, I haven't heard anything in the news. It's been very quiet, and I would like to see that road opened. First of all, there's two nations up there that don't have road access, that they will be getting road access, all-around year road access. That's fantastic, right? And then also, I think it'll be able to open up maybe a couple of little communities along the way, first of all, to work the mines that are going to be up there. And then second of all, to, alleviate the pressure of what we're having, the housing. And okay, thanks for your comments, Samuel, Earth Angel, John Matrix, North Sol Flowers. I don't get that. What that means is North Sol, like northern sunflowers. That's what I was thinking. Alouette, and there was a few more. Oh yeah, fuck all.